A 12-hour shift at the warehouse, a blow, darkness, and then sand in his mouth and a foreign sun overhead. Daniel woke up in the body of a starving man who had been tied up and left to die in the desert. A tag on his chest. Weak. Do not feed. He tugs at the ropes. They won't budge. He looks down and sees someone else's chest. Someone else's ribs sticking out from under the skin. Someone else's thin hands without a single callus. This isn't his body. Daniel Cho was driving a truck after his shift at a warehouse near Seoul. He fell asleep at the wheel. A crash. Silence. And now he lies in someone's bones in the middle of a salt flat, and the heat is burning the last of his life out of him. Panic rises from his stomach in a hot wave, but he suppresses it. He knows this moment. At the warehouse, the system froze in the middle of unloading, and 20 tons of chicken were melting in the truck bed. The newbies were running around and calling for the manager, and Daniel just opened the spare chamber and hauled out the boxes. Panic doesn't solve the problem. Hands do. He exhales. He counts. Water. 6 hours without it in this heat. Shade. Rocks on the horizon 2 kilometers away. Who he is and how he got here. That can wait. The dead don't ask questions. Survive first. He rocks the stake with his foot to which the rope is tied. The ground is loose. The stake comes out. Daniel stands on someone else's weak legs and staggers toward the rocks. He rubs the rope against a sharp edge of a stone. He rubs his wrists raw. He wraps his hands in a strip of fabric from the hem of his pants. The sun presses down on his head like a vice. The scorching rock burns his bare feet. His body wobbles. This guy hasn't had a proper meal in a long time, and this world has decided he isn't worth a bowl of food. Daniel grits his teeth. He keeps going. He reaches the cliffs as the sun begins to set in the west. A reddish rock, 15 meters high. A crevice between 2 boulders. A shadow inside. Almost cold after the hell outside. He leans his back against the rock. He breathes. Alive. Tied up without water or food in a foreign world, in a foreign body, labeled as defective merchandise, but alive. There were days at the warehouse when, instead of 5 trucks, only 1.5 loads of damaged goods would arrive. You don't lose your mind. You count what's left, and you work with what you have. He crawls deeper into the crevice. He runs his hand along the smooth wall, and suddenly, his fingers hit a line, a distinct horizontal strip at knee level. Water once flowed here. The channel hasn't gone anywhere. He goes further into the darkness, one hand on the wall, the other in front of him, and then his fingers touch something cold and smooth. Not stone, metal. Daniel freezes. He traces it with his palm. Flat, vertical, a handle. It's a door. A metal door in the rock in the middle of the desert. Above it, raised symbols. He reads them with his fingers like a blind man and recognizes them before he understands. Hangul, Korean letters. Here. In a world without asphalt or electricity, his heart is pounding. He reads symbol by symbol. Warehouse Terminal Number 7 East. Emergency Reserve Sector. Daniel isn't breathing. He knows what this is. There was one just like it in his old warehouse. A basement room, an untouchable stockpile in case of disaster. Water, rations, a first aid kit. The things that save lives when everything has collapsed. And there it is, a door in the rock on the other side of reality, with an inscription in his native language. He squeezes the handle. The door doesn't budge. He presses against it with his shoulder. He pushes with all the weight of his thin body. Something creaks. It clicks. A chill pulls him into the crack. Not a cool breeze, but a cold, like from a running refrigerator. He squeezes inside. Darkness. 1 step, 2, and a bluish light flickers near the ceiling. Emergency lighting. LEDs at minimum power. The light brightens, and Daniel sees a corridor, gray concrete walls, a metal grate floor, cables beneath it, signs in Korean every 3 meters, storage sector, power unit, control. The corridor leads him into a circular hall, a terminal in the center, a screen, a keyboard, a glass serving window like in an automated cafeteria. He approaches and the screen lights up. Green letters scroll across a black background. System initialized. Emergency mode. Energy reserve 14%. Solar panels damaged. Available categories: food, beverages, medications, and a cursor flashes at the bottom. Awaiting request. And here something strange happens to Daniel. He feels neither fear nor confusion. He feels the same thing he felt every morning when he opened the warehouse program at the start of his shift. A calm, professional readiness. It's a warehouse. An impossible one, perhaps, even if it's crammed into a rock at the edge of the universe. But it's a warehouse. And he's a stock clerk. And he knows what to do. His fingers rest on the keyboard. Drinking water. 500 milliliters. 1 unit. The terminal hums. Something buzzes inside the wall. A tray slides out of the window. On it is a plastic bottle, with a label in Korean. He recognizes the brand. They sold this water at the store near his house. Cold. Real. He unscrews the cap and takes the first sip. The best sip of his life. In both lives. But he doesn't gulp it down. You can't do that after dehydration. His stomach won't accept it. A quarter of the bottle. A pause. Another quarter. Control. Discipline. For the next 2 hours, he flips through the catalog. And his eyes widen. It's all here. Rice, flour, sugar, canned goods, meat, fish, antibiotics, vitamins, hundreds of pages. This isn't an emergency kit. It's an entire food supply base for years of self-sufficiency. But there's not enough energy. At 17%, the terminal produces 35 servings a day, more than enough for one person, not nearly enough for 100. He finds the maintenance section. 8 solar panels on the rock. 6 are buried in sand. 1 is cracked. 1 is working. Clean 5 and the power will rise to 70%, 120 portions a day, a number he can work with. He falls asleep right on the cold grate. That's how those who know tomorrow will be a hard day fall asleep. In the morning, the terminal's beep wakes him. Charging has begun. He eats a portion of rice sitting cross-legged on the floor, and he catches himself thinking. 35 servings. He needs 3. What to do with the remaining 32? He doesn't know where he is yet. He doesn't know the language, but he's already counting the leftovers and thinking about how to distribute them. He smirks. Fine. This is what he knows how to do. This is what keeps him going. The climb up the rock takes an hour. His body is weak. His fingers slip. His knees tremble. But he keeps climbing. From the summit, he can see far. To the north, a white plain. To the south, a ridge of rocks. In the west, something green in the distance. Maybe trees, maybe grass. In the east, emptiness, stretching to the edge of the sky. The west is life. The east is death. He commits it to memory. Then he finds slabs on the southern slope. He drops to his knees and shovels the hot sand with his bare hands. No gloves, no shovel. The sand burns his palms and gets under his nails. He digs and digs. The first panel is clean. The second. The third. By noon, 4 are cleared. His hands are scraped raw. He goes down to the terminal. The screen shows new numbers. Power at 52%. 91 portions per day. Daniel sits down on the floor. He looks at his red, scraped hands. 91 an insane amount for one person, but he already knows. He won't be alone. She appeared on the third day. Daniel was sitting at the entrance to the crevice, whittling a stick against a rock. Not out of boredom. He needed a tool, something to dig with, something to scrape the remaining sand off the panels. He couldn't work with his hands anymore. His palms were covered in blisters, and every movement of his fingers sent a jolt of pain through him. He wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from his shirt. The shirt was getting shorter and shorter. Soon, only rags would remain of it. He heard the sound before he saw its source. A rustle, quiet, like a mouse on the floor. Then ragged breathing, and the crunch of pebbles underfoot. Someone was walking through the crevice, slowly, unevenly, stumbling. Daniel stood up. He grabbed a sharpened stick, not to attack, just to have something in his hands. A figure emerged from around the bend in the stone wall, small, thin. She took 2 steps and fell to her knees, then face down, face in the sand. She didn't move. Daniel approached. He turned the figure onto its back. A girl. He would have guessed she was about 12, maybe 11. Her hair was tangled and dirty. Her face was gray. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, just like his own had been 2 days earlier. Her eyes were half open, cloudy. She was looking at him but didn't see him. Daniel placed his palm forehead. Hot. A fever. Dehydration. Severe. He pinched the skin on the back of her hand. The skin remained creased. It didn't spring back. Bad. That meant her body had lost a lot of fluid. A great deal. He hoisted her under her back and dragged her toward the terminal entrance. She was light. Terribly light, like an empty box, bones and skin. He carried her inside. The cold air of the terminal washed over them both. The girl didn't react. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. Daniel laid her on the floor and ran to the terminal. He didn't order water. That was the first and most important decision. Plain water after such severe dehydration could kill her. He'd seen it in a training video during the first aid course they'd forced him to take at the warehouse 2 years ago. A person finds someone who's dehydrated, gives them a drink. The person drinks greedily. The stomach can't handle it. Vomiting, convulsions. The body loses even more fluid. A vicious cycle. Something else is needed. Daniel typed on the keyboard. Oral rehydration solution. Powder. Single dose. The terminal dispensed a small packet. White powder. The ingredients are printed on the package in small print. Sodium chloride, potassium chloride, glucose, trisodium citrate. All in the right proportions. He ordered water. Warm, not cold. Cold water would cause stomach cramps. The terminal dispensed a bottle at room temperature. Daniel opened the packet. He poured the powder into the bottle cap. He added water, stirred it with his finger. Then he thought. He ordered one more thing. Honey. A small portion. 5 grams. He squeezed a drop into the solution, stirred it. A drop of honey. So it wouldn't taste so disgusting, so the girl wouldn't spit it out. A small thing, but small things matter. He sat down next to her. He lifted her head. She was unconscious, but her lips were moving. A reflex. She was looking for water. He brought the cap to her lips, tilted it, just a little. Literally a few drops fell into her mouth. She swallowed without opening her eyes. Good. He waited 2 minutes, gave her a few more drops. Another 2 minutes. More drops. Slowly, patiently, like an IV, only instead of a needle in a tube, his hands and the bottle cap. By evening, she was able to sit up. Daniel gave her a cracker. One, a small one. She looked at him as if he'd handed her gold. She took a bite, chewed slowly, her eyes closed. Not from weakness, from the taste. A dry, plain cracker, the simplest food in the world. To her, it was a treasure she couldn't comprehend. She finished eating and looked at Daniel. She said something. He didn't understand. She repeated it, pointed at herself, then said the word again. Mir. Her name. Daniel pointed at himself, said, Dan. She tried to repeat it. Dan. The sound was strange in her pronunciation, softer, but recognizable. Then she pointed at the cracker. and raised her eyebrows. A question. What is this? Daniel didn't know how to explain. A cracker, flour, water, salt, baked goods. Words were useless. He simply took out a second cracker and held it out to her. She took it. She broke it in half and held out one half to him. Daniel froze. She was giving him half. She had been dying of thirst and hunger for 3 days and had just received the second cracker of her life, and she was splitting it in half. He took the half. They ate together, in silence, in the blue light of the emergency lighting, on the cold metal floor of a warehouse from another world. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The girl had fallen asleep against the wall. He covered her with the remains of his shirt. He sat at the terminal and thought. She had come from somewhere. That meant there were people nearby, other outcasts, maybe a camp, maybe just a group of survivors. She had been heading toward the cliffs, so she knew she could find shade here, or water. Or maybe she was just wandering aimlessly and got lucky. In any case, she wasn't the first or the last. If they're dumping people here with tags and no food, there will be many more like her. Daniel stared at the terminal screen. 91 rations per day. He uses 3 of them alone. That leaves 88. One person needs about 2 rations a day, counting both water and food, so he can feed another 40 people. If he cleans the remaining panels, even more. The thought was simple and terrifying at the same time. On the morning of the 4th day, Meyer woke up on her own. She sat up, she looked around, then at Daniel, and for the first time, she smiled, weakly, with just one corner of her mouth. But it was a smile. He gave her breakfast, rice with a piece of dried fish, a bowl of water. She ate and stared at the terminal with eyes wide with surprise. He showed her how he ordered. He typed out the text. He pressed a button. Food came out through the little window. She recoiled. Then she came closer. She touched the glass of the window, looked at him, said something long and fast. He didn't understand, but from the intonation, it was something like, "You're a sorcerer." Daniel shook his head, pointed at the keyboard, pointed at his hands, shook his head again. Not magic, a machine. She didn't understand, but she accepted it. Children accept the incomprehensible more easily than adults. After breakfast, Daniel went outside. Miri followed him. He tried to explain with gestures that she'd be better off staying inside, in the cool. She shook her head, stubbornly. She followed him. He gave in. They climbed the rock together. He led the way. She followed. Her slender fingers clung to the ledges. At the top, he showed her the panels. The 2 remaining ones were covered in sand. He gestured what needed to be done. Shovel the sand. She nodded and began working beside him, silently. Her hands were small. She shoveled the sand by the handful, slowly, but she didn't stop. By noon, they had cleared the 5th panel. They left the 6th for tomorrow. They climbed down. Daniel checked the terminal. 61% capacity, 107 servings a day. He nodded. Good. Every panel counts. Every percentage point means another hot meal for someone. On the 5th day, a young man arrived, tall, as thin as Meyer, with the same gray face and sunken eyes. He emerged from the desert to the west and walked straight toward the cliffs, determined. He knew where he was going. Meyer saw him first. She jumped up, screamed, ran toward him. He saw her, and something changed on his face. He rushed forward. They collided halfway there. He wrapped his arms around her, lifted her up, pressed her close. She clung to him with both hands. They spoke quickly, talking over each other. They cried, both of them. Daniel stood to the side and waited. It was a brother. He understood that without a translation, by the way the man held her, by the way she hid in his arms. A brother had come looking for his sister, across the desert, alone. When they finally let go of each other, the man looked at Daniel. Taryn stayed, and he wasn't alone. The next morning he brought 4 more, 2 men, a woman with a child in her arms, all from the same of exiles, all in the same condition: gray faces, chapped lips, ribs visible through their clothes. The child was about 2 years old. He wasn't crying. Children who have been starving for a long time stop crying. They don't have the strength for it. Daniel sat them down in the shade of a crevice. He went to the terminal. He ordered 6 servings of rehydration solution, 6 bottles of water, 6 servings of rice porridge, honey, salt. He ordered separately for the child. Baby food, soft, easy to digest, no salt, no spices. A smiling baby was drawn on the package, a Korean brand. He recognized it. This was what they fed children all over Korea. Now they would feed this to a child in the desert on the other side of reality. The woman took a jar. She looked at the picture, then at Daniel. Her eyes were wet. She said nothing. She opened the lid. She began to feed the child with a small spoon. The child ate, and a minute later, for the first time in a long time, he cried. Not from hunger, from the fact that there was food. Daniel turned away. He looked at the terminal screen. 107 servings, minus 12 for today, 95 left. Enough. Enough for now. By the end of the first week, there were 9 of them. Daniel, Meyer, Taryn, 4 from the camp, and 2 more who came on their own. An old man with a cane and a young woman with a scarred face.
All outcasts.
All with the same story. The village decided they were weak, useless, a burden, and banished them to the wastelands. Some with a sign, some without. The result was the same. Daniel fed them all, every day, 3 times a day. In the morning, rice porridge with salt and a piece of dried meat. At noon, crackers and water. In the evening, a hot meal. He ordered bouillon cubes on the terminal, dissolved them in boiling water, added pieces of dried vegetables, noodles, soy sauce. It turned into soup, simple, ordinary, but hot. And when, on the 7th evening, he set 9 bowls of hot soup before 9 people, the old man with the cane looked into his bowl. Steam rose to his face. He brought the bowl to his lips, took a sip, and his hands trembled. He set the bowl down on the stone, covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. He was crying, silently. The woman with the burned face placed a hand on his shoulder. She was crying too. Taryn sat like a stone.
His jaw clenched. His eyes were wet. Meyer ate her soup in small sips and looked at Daniel, without looking away. Daniel sat across from them and ate the same soup, from the same bowl. He didn't make speeches. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't explain. He just ate, beside them, together, because that was the only thing that made sense. On the 9th day, Daniel realized there wasn't enough food. Not in terms of quantity, there were enough portions. The problem lay elsewhere. People ate, drank, slept in the shade of the rocks, woke up, ate again, and so on and on. They were surviving, but they weren't living. He could see it in their eyes. Dull, empty, like the people in line for free food at the subway station in Seoul. Grateful, but lifeless. They had grown accustomed to being the ones who are fed, those who wait, those who take. The sign on Daniel's chest read, "Weak and do not feed." Each of these 9 people had their own invisible sign. They carried it inside. Daniel decided it was time to change that. But not with words. He wasn't good at giving speeches. He was good at giving orders. On the morning of the 10th day, he didn't hand out breakfast as usual. Instead, he went out to the people with a pointed stick and drew a rectangle in the sand. A big one, 5 by 3 meters. Everyone was watching. He pointed at Taryn, pointed at the stick, pointed at the rectangle, and made a gesture with his hands. Dig. Taryn frowned. He looked at the rectangle, then at Daniel. Daniel pulled a bowl of hot porridge from behind his back. He set it next to the rectangle and pointed. First you dig, then you eat. Taryn understood. His face flushed. For a second, Daniel saw anger. You're making me work for my food, just like in the village, just like everywhere. Daniel didn't back down. He pointed at himself. Then he took a second stick and started digging next to it, by himself,
in silence. A minute later, Taryn stood next to him and started digging too. That evening, Daniel cooked a real hot meal for everyone for the first time. Not soup from a bouillon cube, real rice porridge with meat and vegetables. He ordered rice from the terminal. Dried meat, freeze-dried carrots, freeze-dried onions, soy sauce, sesame oil. They had built a fire pit out of stones back on the 6th day. Taryn found something resembling flint in the rocks, a spark, dry roots of some kind of shrub. Fire. Daniel placed a tin can from a can, a big one, about 3 liters. He poured in water, added rice. When the rice was cooked, he added finely chopped meat, carrots, onions, a spoonful of soy sauce, a drop of sesame oil. The aroma wafted through the crevice, and Daniel saw all 9 people turn their heads in one direction, toward the fire, like sunflowers toward the sun. This scent was unfamiliar to them. There was no soy sauce in this world. There was no sesame oil. These things simply didn't exist here. For Daniel, it was the usual porridge he cooked for himself after night shifts. For them, it was a scent from another planet. He divided the porridge into bowls, tin cans from canned goods. They became dishes. He handed them out. Everyone took one. Everyone watched. No one ate. They waited. Daniel didn't understand at first. Then he understood. They were waiting for him to start first. He picked up a bowl, took a sip, nodded, and then they began to eat. The old man with the cane ate slowly. He held each spoonful in his mouth for a long time, as if trying to remember. The woman with the burned face ate and shook her head, quietly, as if she didn't believe it. Taryn ate quickly, like a man, without ceremony, but he stopped at the 3rd spoonful. He looked into the bowl, then at Daniel, and nodded, once, briefly. It wasn't a bow of gratitude like the first time. It was something else. Acknowledgement. You're not just feeding me. You're feeding me in a way that makes me want to keep living. Mire sat next to Daniel. She ate her porridge with small, neat movements. She already looked better. Her face had regained some color. Her eyes had cleared up. She had started to gain weight. Just a little. But her cheeks weren't sunken anymore. Daniel noticed it. Noticed and made a mental note. Like in a warehouse, stock levels are recovering. Inventory is rising. Normal. On the 12th day, 3 more arrived. On the 14th, 5 more. Word was spreading across the wastelands. Daniel didn't know how. He hadn't sent any messengers. He didn't call them. But people came. Outcasts, loners, small groups of 2 or 3, all in the same condition. Emaciated, dehydrated, with empty eyes. They came to the cliffs. They found the crevice. They saw people eating hot food who didn't look like they were dying. And they stayed. By the end of the 2nd week, there were 17 of them, not counting Daniel. There were enough portions. But Daniel was already thinking ahead. 17 people, 34 portions a day, plus his 3, 37. Out of 107. That leaves 70. Sounds like a lot, but if 5 or 6 new ones arrive every week, in a month there will be 40. In 2 months, 60. In 3 months, resources will be stretched to the limit. We need to increase capacity. We need a 6th panel. He climbed the cliff with Taryn. He pointed out the last panel, buried in sand. It was farther away than the others, right at the edge of the ledge. And there was more sand on it, much more. A rocky overhang above it acted like a funnel. The wind carried the sand straight onto the panel. Even if we clear it in a week, it'll be buried again. We need another solution. Daniel sat on the edge of the cliff and looked down. Taryn sat beside him. He was silent. Over the past 2 weeks, they had learned to be silent together. It was comfortable, Daniel thought. The rock ledge above directs the sand, so we need to either remove the ledge or redirect the flow. Removing the rock is impossible. No tools. Redirect it? How? He looked around. Flat stones lay nearby, thin ones. If we set them vertically in front of the panel, like a wall, the wind will carry the sand, and it will hit the wall and fall down to the panel. Not perfect. Some of the sand would still blow over, but it would stop most of it. He showed Taryn. Taryn looked, thought, nodded. They hauled the stones and built a low wall, 1/2 meter high, in a semicircle, like a shield. Then they cleared the panel. The surface gleamed. Daniel climbed down. He checked the terminal. 68%, 119 portions. He nodded. Another panel, broken. It couldn't be fixed, but 6 out of 7 working was good enough. On the 17th day, Daniel established the first rule. He couldn't explain it in words. He was learning the language bit by bit. Meyer turned out to be a patient teacher. She would point to objects and say the word. Daniel would repeat it. Water, food, stone, fire, hand, foot, sky, sun. Simple words. He memorized them quickly. A logistics specialist has a good memory for systems. Language is a system, a code, a key value pair, a word object. He memorized 5 to 10 words a day. After 2 weeks, he could construct simple phrases. But he explained the rule not with words, but with action. On the morning of the 18th day, he went out to the people. He laid out on the ground in front of him all the food supplies that had been in the storage pit. Rice, dried meat, crackers, salt, water. Then he gestured with his hand to everyone present. 17 people. Then he pointed to the food. Then he held up 3 fingers. 3 times a day. Then he pointed to the sun and swept his hand across the sky. 1 day. Then he pointed to the food again and spread his hands. That's it. That's all there is for 1 day. People watched. Then he pointed at Taryn, then at one of the men, then at himself. 3 people. He pointed at the food, then at the gesture of distribution, then raised 3 fingers. 3 times a day. 3 people distribute it. Everyone gets the same. And Daniel gets just as much as everyone else. No more. Not a single grain. Taryn translated for the others. Daniel saw them exchange glances. In their world, the one who feeds always eats first and the most. That's the law. And this man, out of nowhere, puts himself on the same level as everyone else. The old man with the cane looked at Daniel with a long gaze and said one word. Daniel didn't understand it then. Meyer translated it later. The word meant something like fair, or right, or real. One word in the language of Altera that meant all of that at once. On the 20th day, the first quarrel happened. One of the new arrivals, a large man with heavy hands, a former farmhand by the looks of him. He approached the storage pit at night and took an extra portion. Taryn noticed him. Taryn grabbed his arm. The man broke free. He shoved Taryn. Taryn fell. He got up. He clenched his fists. Daniel woke up from the noise. He went out. He saw 2 men standing opposite each other in the moonlight, ready to fight, and between them, crackers scattered on the ground. Daniel approached. He stood between them. He gestured to the man, with sit. The man didn't sit. His eyes were angry, hungry. Not physically. He ate 3 times a day like everyone else. But the hunger inside him didn't come from his stomach. This man had always been last in line, last at the table, the last one anyone remembered. And now that food was within reach, he couldn't help himself, because his body remembered. Tomorrow they might not give it to him. Tomorrow they might kick him out. Take it now. Take it while you can. Daniel saw it. He'd seen this before. At the warehouse after the typhoon, when humanitarian aid arrived, and people grabbed 3 bags of rice, even though 1 would have been enough. Not greed. Fear. Pure animal fear of starvation. Daniel didn't scold him. He didn't punish him. He walked over to the food distribution station. He returned a minute later. In his hands was a bowl. Hot. Rice porridge. Fresh. Straight from the dispenser. He set the bowl down in front of the man, sat down on the ground beside him, gestured. Eat. The man stood there. He looked down at the bowl, then at Daniel. His fists unclenched. He sat down. He took the bowl.
He ate in silence. When he had finished, Daniel pointed to the storage pit, then to the sky, then back to the pit. There would be food every day. Every day. The man watched. His throat moved, as if he were swallowing something other than porridge. He nodded. He stood up. He went to sleep. He didn't steal anymore. But every morning, he was the first to come to the pit. He stood nearby. He made sure the food was there. And only then did he leave. After that night, Daniel introduced a second rule. He asked Mire to help him explain it. By this point, she understood his gestures almost without fail. He spoke, she translated. The rule was simple. No one here pays for food, but everyone does what they can. Those who can carry stones, carry stones. Those who can sew, mend clothes. Those who can count, help tally the supplies. Those who can't do anything, learn. You pay not with food, but with what you are. People listened. Taryn translated the difficult parts. The old man with the cane nodded. He understood. This was not slavery, nor was it a trade. It was an order. Order. A system in which everyone has a place, and every place is important. Daniel didn't know that at that moment, he was doing something impossible for Elterra. In a world where a person's value is measured by the power of their gift, he was building a place where value is measured by what you're willing to give to others. Without magic, without a gift, without labels. By the end of the first month, there were 32. Daniel kept track. Every night before bed, he would go to the terminal and enter the data into a text file. The terminal system allowed him to save notes, a simple text editor. He recorded the number of people, daily ration consumption, remaining power, panel status, problems, plans. He kept track of it like a warehouse, because that's what it was. Only instead of goods on the shelves, there were people behind the walls. And instead of expiration dates, he calculated how many days a specific person could last without a hot meal if the system suddenly failed. Meyer became his right-hand woman, not because he appointed her, because she stood by his side of her own accord and didn't leave. She had a frighteningly precise memory. She remembered the name of every new person, remembered when they arrived, in what condition, what they ate on their first day. Daniel told her once, in broken Elterra, "You remember better than my terminal." She looked at him seriously and replied, "The terminal remembers numbers. I remember faces." The camp was changing. Every day something was added. A shelter made of stones and dry tree trunks blown in by the wind. A larger fire pit. A second fire pit for boiling water. Daniel found sugar and yeast in the terminal's catalog. He ordered them. He tried to bake bread. The first attempt failed. The flatbread came out flat, hard, and bitter. He threw it away. He tried again. He changed the proportions. Less yeast, more water, longer on the fire. The second attempt was better. The third almost worked. On the fourth try, bread emerged from under the stone lid of the makeshift oven. Not perfect, crooked, with a crack on the side, but soft on the inside, and smelling so good that all 32 people turned their heads. Daniel broke it open. Steam burst out. He handed out a piece to everyone. Small pieces. There wasn't enough for a whole loaf to go around. But everyone got one. The old man with the cane took a piece. He sniffed it, took a bite, chewed slowly. Then he looked at Daniel and said a word that Daniel already knew. That word meant warmth, not temperature, the warmth that comes from a person. Meyer stood nearby, holding her piece with both hands. She pressed it close to her. She didn't eat it, she just held it, as if she were afraid it would disappear. On the 35th day, the first caravan arrived. Not outcasts, merchants, real ones. 3 wagons, 8 people. They were traveling through the wastelands along an old route to bypass the tax posts and had accidentally veered toward the cliffs. They saw smoke rising from the hearths. They approached. Daniel had learned of them in advance. Taryn had organized lookouts. 4 men took turns climbing to the top of the cliff and looked around. When the wagons appeared on the horizon, the lookout climbed down and reported. Daniel went out to meet them. Alone. Unarmed. The merchants stopped at a distance. Their leader was a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and a scar on his chin. He looked at Daniel, at the behind him, at the smoke, at the people. He said something. By this point, Daniel understood simple phrases. Who are you? What's here? How many of you are there? He answered, slowly, with mistakes, but clearly. We live here. We have food. We're not thieves. The merchant looked at him skeptically. There are no camps with food in the wastelands. In the wastelands, there are only the dead. He ordered his men to wait and came closer. Alone. Daniel led him into the camp, showed him the shelters, showed him the fire pits, showed him the storage pit. The merchant watched. His face changed. Distrust, surprise, greed. Then surprise again. Daniel proposed a deal. Not with money. He had no money, and he wasn't interested in money. He proposed an exchange. Food for tools. He showed the merchant the bread. Let him taste it. The merchant took a bite. Froze. Chewed. His eyes widened. He had never tasted anything like it. In Elterra, bread was rough, barren flatbread, made from barley flour, gray, heavy, tasteless. What Daniel had given him was soft, airy, with a light, sweetish aftertaste, like something from another world. The merchant chewed it down, swallowed, looked at Daniel with new eyes, and asked one word. How much? Daniel raised his hand, pointed at the bread, pointed at the carts, gestured. What do you have? The merchant grinned, led Daniel to the carts. There was a lot of everything there. Cloth, ropes, clay pots, iron tools, knives, hammers, nails, leather. Daniel examined every item, picked them up, felt them, assessed them, like he was inspecting a shipment, professionally. The merchant watched, and with every passing minute, his smirk faded. This skinny guy in ragged shirt sleeves knew his way around the goods. He wasn't grabbing just anything. He was choosing, methodically. Daniel made his selection. 20 meters of heavy fabric for awnings and clothing, 10 meters of rope, 2 hammers, a handful of nails, 10 clay bowls, 3 knives. For this, he gave 5 loaves of bread, 20 servings of crackers, 10 servings of dried meat, 2 bottles of honey. The merchant accepted the food with a look on his face as if he were being given gold. He opened the honey and tasted it right in front of Daniel. He froze. He closed his eyes. Honey was a rarity in Elterra. Wild bees were found only in the western forests, but this honey was different. Thick, dark, with a floral aroma that didn't exist here. The merchant closed the jar, carefully, as if it were a treasure, and told Daniel he would return in 2 weeks and bring whatever Daniel asked for. Daniel nodded. He had already made a list in his head. Shovels, pickaxes, buckets, heavier fabric, thicker ropes, seeds. If there were seeds in Elterra that grew in dry soil, he needed those seeds. And clay for bricks, lots of clay. He was going to build walls. After the caravan left, Daniel gathered everyone. Taryn helped with the translation. Meyer stood nearby and added words when Daniel stumbled. He spoke slowly, in broken Elterra with a Korean accent, but they listened to him. He said, "We won't just survive. We will build. We need walls. We need water. We need land where something grows. I can give you food, but I can't give you a home. We will build a home together." People listened. Some nodded, some looked skeptical. 32 people in the desert, without magic, without tools, without protection, against a whole world that had decided they were trash. The old man with the stick stood up, leaning heavily on his staff. He scanned everyone present,
Then he looked at Daniel.
and spoke a long sentence. Taryn translated.
The old man said there was a saying in his village. A wall begins with a single stone. And that he was old and weak, but he could still lift a stone. Then he bent down. He picked up a stone the size of a fist. He placed it in front of Daniel. Taryn bent down. He picked up a second one. He placed it next to the first. Mire picked up a third. The woman with the scarred face picked up a fourth. By evening, there was a pile of stones in front of Daniel. 32 stones, one from each of them. Daniel looked at the pile. And for the first time since he'd been in this world, his throat tightened. He swallowed. He nodded. And he said the one word he'd already learned in the language of Elterra. Good. Construction began the next day. Daniel wasn't an architect. He wasn't a builder. But he knew one thing. A warehouse needs walls. Any warehouse. Walls protect from the weather, from thieves, from the wind, from the sand.
And walls also make a place. Not just a dot in the desert, but somewhere you can come to, and a place you don't want to leave. He sketched a plan in the sand with a stick. A simple rectangle, 20 meters by 15. Around the crevice leading to the terminal, stone walls, 1.5 meters high. Not for defense, for marking. This is our place. Taryn organized the men to gather stone. The women mixed clay from sand and water to bind the stones together. The children brought small stones and filled in the cracks. Everyone worked, without exception. Daniel hauled stones too. His hands were already rougher than on the first day. Calluses, cracks. He stopped wrapping them in cloth. No time for that. The wall grew slowly, centimeter by centimeter. By the end of the first month, one corner was ready, a quarter of one wall. Crooked, uneven, with bits of clay sticking out. But a wall, a real wall. The first month was over. Daniel stood atop the cliff and looked down at the camp. 2 shelters, 2 fire pits, a storage pit, a section of wall. 32 people who, just a month ago, had been trash dumped in the desert. Now they ate 3 times a day. They worked, they built, they argued about where to place the next stone. It wasn't a city, not even a village. It was a seedling, a tiny sprout in dead soil. But it was alive, and it was growing. Daniel climbed downstairs. He went to the terminal. He ordered coffee, 1 cup, for himself. A small indulgence he allowed himself once every 3 days. The terminal dispensed a cup, hot, black, no sugar. The smell of coffee filled the room, a smell from a past life, from the dispatch room, from night shifts, from a world where he was a nobody, an invisible logistics worker, a man who made sure the food was on the shelves. He took a sip, closed his eyes. The same taste, the same bitterness, but a different man. He opened his eyes, looked at the screen. 32 people, 68% power. Consumption stable. 3 days worth of supplies in the pit. The trade caravan will return in a week. The wall is growing. The plan is working. He finished his coffee, tossed the cup, went back to work. That night, Meyer found him sitting at the entrance to the crevice. He was looking at the stars. The sky in the wastelands was incredible. No city lights, no smog, millions of stars. Different constellations, a foreign sky. Meyer sat down beside him, silently. She knew how to be silent beside him better than anyone. After a few minutes, she said quietly, "Dan." He turned. She pointed at the stars, then at the camp below, then at him. And she said a phrase that he understood completely for the first time. "You came from there." Not a question, a statement. She knew, or guessed, that he wasn't from here, that he had come from another place. From a world where there was food in sealed packages and labels in a language no one here knew. Daniel looked at her, a 17-year-old girl who 2 weeks ago had been lying in the sand, dying. Now she was sitting next to him, looking at the stars and asking questions he didn't have answers to. He didn't lie. He nodded. Yes. From there. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "You'll come back?" He really thought about it, and shook his head. "No, I won't come back." She nodded, as if she'd been waiting for that answer. Then she stood up and said, "Your bowl is on the hearth. I left it there. Eat. You missed dinner tonight." Daniel looked at her. She was standing in the moonlight, slender, upright, with serious, dark eyes. And he thought that for the first time in a month, in this world, someone had noticed that he hadn't eaten. She had noticed. Of course she had noticed. She remembered everything. He stood up. He walked to the hearth. The merchant returned as promised, after 14 days, but not with 3 carts, with 7, and not alone. 2 other merchants from different guilds were with him. The rumor about a place in the wastes where they served impossible food had spread faster than Daniel had expected. The merchant with the shrewd eyes and a scar on his chin brought everything Daniel had asked for: shovels, pickaxes, buckets, heavy cloth, ropes, clay in sacks, and seeds. Small linen pouches containing barley seeds and a root vegetable called something like white root in the language of Altera. Daniel took the seeds. He examined them. Large, similar to turnips if the merchant's description was to be believed. They grow in dry soil. They ripen in 2 months. They tolerate heat. They hardly need any watering. Perfect. He paid more than enough. Bread, honey, coffee. He added the coffee at the last moment. He ordered 200 grams of ground coffee from the terminal, packed it into a linen bag, handed it to the merchant, said one word: "Try it." The merchant opened the bag, sniffed. His face took on a strange expression. He didn't recognize the scent. No one in Altera did. Coffee didn't exist here. Daniel gestured. "Pour hot water over it." "Wait, drink." The merchant scooped up a pinch, skeptical. He dropped it into a mug of boiling water. He waited. He tasted it, and froze. Daniel looked at his face and saw what he would see many more times: the moment when a person first tastes a flavor that shouldn't exist in his world. The merchant took another sip. Another. His eyes began to shine. Not from tears, from something else. From the realization that the world was bigger than he'd thought. That there were things he couldn't even imagine. And here was one of them, in his mug. Hot, bitter, with an aroma that cleared his head. The merchant finished it, set the mug down. He looked at Daniel and said, "How much is the bag?" Daniel shook his head. "Not for sale, only a trade. Only what I need." The merchant narrowed his eyes. His shrewd eyes grew even shrewder. He was beginning to understand. This man by the rock isn't a merchant. He doesn't want money. He wants things. Specific things. Useful things. And he knows exactly which ones. A man like this is someone you can do business with. Or, a man like this is someone to be feared. The merchant hadn't decided yet. 2 other merchants had brought their wares: fabrics, leather, ceramic tableware. One of them had brought 10 sheep, alive, skinny, half dead from the trek across the wastelands, but alive. Daniel looked at the sheep, then at the merchant. The merchant said the sheep weren't his. Their previous owner had abandoned them, too weak to drive to market, didn't have time to kill them. The merchant had picked them up along the road. They were worth nothing, almost dead. Daniel crouched down next to the nearest sheep. He examined it, emaciated, dehydrated. Its hooves were cracked, but its eyes were alive. He knew what to do. At a warehouse near Seoul, he had once received a shipment of frozen lamb. And out of curiosity, he had read the document detailing the sheep's condition. Useless knowledge back then, priceless now. He asked the merchant for the sheep, in exchange for 3 loaves of bread. The merchant laughed. 3 loaves for 10 dead sheep? The best deal of his life. He shook his hand. The sheep stayed. Daniel put Taryn in charge of the sheep. He explained with gestures and simple words. Water, often, little by little. Food, dry roots ground into porridge. Shade, essential. During the day, the sheep must be under cover. In the evening, they can be out in the open. Taryn listened. He nodded. He was a country boy. He knew animals, maybe not sheep, but he understood the principle. A week later, 3 sheep died. 2 weak. They couldn't make it. 7 survived. After 2 weeks, they started eating on their own. After 3, they were back on their feet, skinny. Their wool was in tatters. But they were alive. Daniel looked at them and counted. 7 sheep. If 4 of them were females, and at least 1 gave birth in 5 months, they'd have 10. In a year, 20. Milk, wool, meat if necessary, but meat later. First, the flock had to grow. Logistics, long-term planning, an investment with deferred returns. He smiled. Sheep were like inventory. Don't touch them until you've built up a stockpile. On the 45th day, Daniel planted the first seeds. He chose a spot south of the rocks. The soil there was slightly darker, slightly denser, not sand, but something closer to clay. He dug up the plot, 3 meters by 2, small, experimental, with the shovel he'd gotten from the traders. His hands were already used to the work. His calluses had hardened. He planted the white root seeds in even rows, spaced a palm's width apart. He watered them with water from the terminal, just a little. These seeds don't need heavy watering. That's what the merchant said. Then he planted seeds from the terminal in the neighboring plot, from the catalog. Tomatoes, carrots, basilic, earth seeds from another world. He didn't know if they would grow in this soil, under this sun, in this air, but it was worth a try. If they grew, the camp would have its own vegetables, independent of the terminal. That was the key step. The terminal provides food, but the terminal could break down. It could run out of power. Anything could happen. Daniel didn't trust things that depended on a single source. In the warehouse, that was called a single point of failure, and it had to be eliminated. On the 50th day, she appeared. Daniel remembered that day because in the morning, he discovered that the tomatoes had sprouted. Tiny green dots in the brown earth. Earth seeds in the soil of Altera. They were growing. He was kneeling over the garden bed, looking at the sprouts, when Taryn approached and said, "Someone's coming. 1 person, from the west." Daniel stood up. He walked to the western side of the camp. The wall here was already waist-high, crooked but sturdy. He stood by the wall and watched. The figure was approaching, not staggering, not falling, walking confidently, steadily. Not an outcast. Outcasts don't walk like that. They stagger, they drag their feet. This figure walked like a person who knows where they're going and why. She came closer, and Daniel saw. Tall, light hair tied in a bun, straight back, simple but clean clothes, not rags, a cloak, boots, a bag on her belt, a travel bag on her back. She stopped 10 paces from the wall, looked at Daniel, then at the camp behind him, at the walls, at the shelters, at the smoke from the hearths, at the people who had stopped and were looking at her. And she said, clearly, calmly, in the language of Altera, "My name is Ariel Hale, former priestess of the Temple of the Gift of the Earth. I left the order. I have nowhere to go. I heard that here they feed those who have nowhere else to go." Is that true? Daniel looked at her. A priestess. From the temple. The very temple that controls the magic of agriculture in this world. That decides who eats and who doesn't. That hangs up signs, "Weak, do not feed." She came from there. And she stands before his wall, with her back straight, with clear eyes, without a hint of pleading in her voice. She wasn't begging. She was asking. There's a difference. Daniel answered, in his broken Eltaran. It's true. They feed people here. She nodded, stepped over the low wall, entered the camp, looked around. 32 people were staring at her. Some stepped back. They recognized the clothing. Not her specifically, but the style. Priestly. Even without the order's insignia, there was something temple-like in her bearing and manner. Something that made the people whom the temple had cast out into the desert instinctively shrink back. Ariel noticed it. Daniel saw her jaw clench for a second. Then it relaxed. She turned to Daniel. She said,
I didn't come as a priestess. I came as a human. If you need proof, tell me how. Daniel looked at her, then at Meyer, who stood nearby with a tense expression, then at Taryn, who had his hand on the hilt of the knife at his belt, then back at Ariel, and he said, Have you eaten today? She blinked. It wasn't the question she'd expected. No, she replied. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Daniel nodded. He turned and walked to the hearth. He returned with a bowl, rice with meat and vegetables, hot. He set it down on the stone in front of her, sat down across from her. She stood there, looked at the bowl, then at him, then sat down, took the bowl, ate in silence, quickly. She was hungrier than she let on. When she finished, she looked up. Daniel said, There's one rule here. Everyone eats the same. Everyone works. You pay with what you know how to do. What do you know how to do? Ariel set down the empty bowl. She looked him in the eyes, straight on, without flinching, and she answered, I can read, write, count. I know the laws of the kingdom. I know the map of Eltera. I know the names of all the lords and their lands. I know how the temple is built. I know its weaknesses. And I know that in 6 months, everything you're building here will be useless. Because in 6 months, the drought will reach the capital. And then it won't be merchants who come here, but an army. Daniel was silent. He looked at her. Drought. He had heard that word. The merchants had mentioned it. No rain. The rivers are drying up. But he didn't know the scale of it. He didn't know that this wasn't a temporary problem, that it was a catastrophe creeping in from the east and devouring everything in its path. Ariel knew. She knew because they spoke of it in the temple, behind closed doors. The earth mages sensed it. The earth was weakening. The gift was working less and less effectively. What used to yield a harvest in a day now took a week. The temple was silent. The royal court was silent. Because if people found out that magic was ceasing to work, everything would collapse. The entire system, the entire hierarchy, the entire world. Daniel sat and listened. Ariel spoke evenly, without emotion. Facts, dates, names, provinces that had already lost their harvests, rivers that had dried up, villages abandoned by their inhabitants. She spoke for 20 minutes. When she finished, Daniel was silent for a long time. He looked at his small camp, 32 people, a section of wall, 2 fire pits, a garden bed with tomatoes that had just sprouted, and the drought, which in 6 months would devour this world entirely. His warehouse distributed 119 rations a day. That was more than enough for 32 people. It wouldn't be enough for 1,000, much less 10,000. And when the drought engulfs the capital, it won't be 10,000 who come. Everyone will come. He looked at Ariel and asked, Why did you come? The truth. She looked at him for a long time. Then she answered quietly. Because for 10 years, I served a God who feeds only the strong, and you feed the weak. And I became curious. Which of you is right? Daniel stood up, walked over to the terminal, typed on the keyboard. Bread, 1 portion. Next, butter, 10 grams. Salt, 2 grams. The terminal dispensed it. He returned. He placed a slice of fresh bread in front of Ariel, spread with butter, lightly sprinkled with salt. She looked at the bread. Her face changed. Something stirred for a single second. Then it returned to calm. But Daniel saw it. He knew this bread wasn't from a catalog. He knew it from the description Ariel would have given if she could. Bread with butter and salt. That's how they did it in the village. In her village. Before the temple. Before everything. She took the bread, took a bite, chewed. She swallowed. Her eyes grew wet. She didn't cry, but tears welled up in her eyes. She finished the bread, wiped her hands, looked at Daniel, and said one word. I'll stay. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at the terminal and thought. Drought. 6 months. What could he do in 6 months? He opened a text file. He began to write. A plan. A long one. A detailed one. In Korean. Because he could think faster in Korean. Point 1. Increase the terminal's power. The broken panel. Can it be repaired? It needs to be inspected again. Thoroughly. Item 2. Walls. Finish the perimeter by the end of the 2nd month. Item 3. Water. Find a source. Or build a collection system. Morning dew, condensation, anything. Can't depend solely on the terminal. Item 4. Agriculture. If tomatoes grow, maybe other things will too. Expand the garden beds. Try growing grains. Point 5. People. 32 isn't enough. If the army comes, 32 people won't stop anyone. We need more. We need the camp to become a place where not only outcasts come, but also those who have something to lose. Merchants, artisans, maybe even soldiers. Point 6. Information. Ariel knows the world, knows politics, knows the map. Use that. Point 7. The mystery. Who sent the terminal? Why? Why specifically him? These questions aren't urgent, but they won't go away. He wrote until dawn. When he finished, the file took up 3 screens. He reread it, nodded, saved it, went outside. The sun was rising, orange, huge. The desert was pink in the morning light. Meyer was already sitting by the hearth. She was making breakfast, rice porridge, just like every morning. She saw Daniel and said, "You didn't sleep again." He didn't answer, sat down next to her. She set a bowl in front of him. Rice, meat, vegetables. His portion. Always the same. Always ready. He ate and watched the sunrise, and thought about how in 6 months this sun would shine on dead earth, if he didn't do anything, if he remained just a storekeeper. Meyer sat down next to him. She ate her porridge, silently. Then she said quietly, "That woman, the priestess, she told you something bad." "Yes," Daniel replied. "Bad." Meyer paused. Then she said, "But you didn't leave." Daniel looked at her. "No, I didn't leave." Meyer nodded, as if that was all she needed to know. They finished breakfast. Daniel stood up. He walked to the wall. He picked up a stone. He put it back in place. Next one, next one. The day began. Ariel turned out to be more useful than Daniel could have imagined. On the 3rd day after her arrival, he sat her down next to him at the terminal and asked her to tell him everything she knew about the map of Alterra. She spoke for 4 hours. Daniel listened and drew with a stick on the trampled earth. The continent stretched from west to east. In the west, fertile plains. There was the capital. There were temples. There were large cities. The further east, the drier it became. Foothills, steppes, and finally, the wastelands. The very edge. The place where the unwanted were cast out. It was a 3-day journey by cart from the wastelands to the nearest large city. The city was called Carven, a trading crossroads. Caravans passed through it on their way east and back. It was from there that the merchants came. Further west lay Morden, larger, with a garrison, with a temple mission. Further still lay the provincial capital, Velton, and beyond it, across the mountain pass, the royal capital, Eltaris. 4 points in a straight line from the wastelands to the throne. Daniel looked at his map on the ground and saw not geography. He saw a logistics chain. a warehouse, a distribution center, a regional hub, central node, 4 links. His warehouse stood at the very beginning of the chain, at the farthest point. But when the drought comes from east to west, his point will be the first on the path of those fleeing it. Ariel told him about the temple. The gift of the earth is not just an ability, it is a religion. The temple teaches that the earth bears fruit only for those who are worthy. Earth mages are the chosen ones, conduits of the earth's will. The stronger the mage is, the closer he is to God. Those weak in the gift are far from God. Those without the gift are rejected altogether. The logic is simple and cruel. If you are starving, it means the earth does not want to feed you. It means you are not needed. Exile to the wastes is not a punishment. It is a ritual. The priests say they release the weak into the earth's hands. If the earth wants him, it will return him. The earth does not want him. No one returns. Daniel listened, and his face remained unchanged. But inside, something tightened. The tag on his chest, weak, do not feed. This was not the cruelty of a single person. It was a system, state-sanctioned, religious, drilled into their heads from childhood. You're weak, so you're to blame. You're hungry, so you deserve it. He knew systems like this. In his world, they were different, less overt. But the essence was the same. If you work in a warehouse for minimum wage and fall asleep at the wheel after a 12-hour shift, then that's your problem. You should have tried harder. Ariel left the temple because the temple refused to feed the starving. 3 villages on the eastern border had lost their harvest, an early sign of a drought. The villagers came to the nearest temple for help. The priests consulted and refused. They said the land was testing these people. If they worthy, the harvest will return. If not, then so be it. Ariel was the youngest priestess. She stood behind a column and listened. And at that moment, something inside her broke. Not right away, slowly, like a crack in a wall. Small at first, then wider. Then the wall falls. She left at night, without permission, without a blessing. It was a crime. A priestess cannot leave the order of her own free will. Exile is the punishment for this. Irony. She left to help the exiles and became an exile herself. For 2 months she walked east, helped where she could, healed, taught, shared the little she had. Then she heard a rumor. At the edge of the wastes there is a place, people, food, no magic, no gift, no strings attached. She came. Daniel put her knowledge to use immediately. He asked her to make a list of what the camp needed and what couldn't be obtained from the terminal. Ariel wrote on a smooth stone with charcoal. Her handwriting was neat and beautiful, a temple education. The list turned out to be long. Building materials, wood that doesn't grow in the wastes, iron for tools, a loom, a potter's wheel, knowledge of local plants, maps of aquifers, information on the political situation, allies among the lords, protection from the temple when it finds out. Daniel underlined the last item. When, not if, when the temple finds out that someone in the wastes is feeding people without magic, they will come. It's a matter of time. Ariel said they have 3 or 4 months at most. Merchants will spread the rumor. The rumor will reach Carven, from Carven to Morden, from Morden to the temple's representative office, from there to the high priest of Calden, and then it will begin. Daniel nodded. 3 months. He mentally rearranged his plan. Priorities had shifted. Walls had become more important than garden beds. People had become more important than sheep. He needed fighters, not for war, to prevent the war from starting. The best defense is the cost of the attack. If attacking the camp costs more than leaving it alone, then no one will attack. That's how the logistics of conflict work. He explained this to Ariel. She listened with an expression he was beginning to recognize, a mixture of surprise and respect. "You think like a general," she said. "No," he replied. "I think like a quartermaster. A general counts soldiers. A quartermaster counts the days until the enemy's supplies run out. She looked at him for a long time.
Then she said, I have a lot to learn from you. And he saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Not gratitude, not admiration. Interest. A lively, genuine interest of one mind toward another. She wasn't looking up at him from the bottom up like Meyer. She looked straight at him, as an equal. Construction picked up speed. With the new tools from the merchants, the work went 3 times faster. Pickaxes chipped away at the stone, shovels dug, hammers pounded. By the 60th day, the wall was complete, 1.5 meters high, a full perimeter, with a gate made of 2 large stones set upright. Not a fortress, a fence. But it worked. The people inside felt different. Daniel saw it. When the wall was closed, something changed in their gait, in their voices. They stopped looking over their shoulders, stopped flinching at every noise. The wall told them a simple thing. Here inside, out there. It's safe here. The old man with the cane ran his hand along the wall, stroked the stone, as if it were a living thing. He said, I had a wall, a long time ago, around my house. Then they took the house, and the wall. Now there's a wall again. Daniel stood nearby and said nothing. A wall, a house, a wall around the house, simple things. For someone, they were everything. On the 65th day, Yuna Park arrived. She didn't look like an outcast, small, quick, with sharp eyes that scanned everything around her in a second. Her clothes were travel-worn but sturdy, good boots, a full knapsack. She said she was a traveler from Carvin. She said she had lost her way. She asked for water and a place to stay. Daniel gave her both. He sat her down at the communal table. He set a bowl of hot food in front of her. By this time, he was already cooking a more varied menu. Noodles and broth, rice with vegetables, porridge with honey in the mornings. Yuna ate and looked around. With quick, brief glances, she counted the people. She assessed the walls. She looked for the source of the food. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. He had seen people like that before. Inspectors sometimes came to the warehouse disguised as customers. They behaved exactly the same way. They ate and inspected at the same time. Yuna stayed for 2 days. On the 3rd, she got ready to leave. Daniel came out to meet her at the gate. He said, "Wait." She stopped. He spoke in his now quite passable El Terra. "You're not lost. You came to look around. You'll tell me who sent you, or I'll tell you what I've noticed." Yuna froze. Her face went stiff, then soft, then stiff again. She was quickly weighing her options. Lie, run, fight, confess. Daniel saw all 4 options in her eyes. He waited. She chose the 5th. She smiled and said, "Okay, my father sent me, the head of the Carvin Trade Guild. He wants to know where the food here comes from, food that isn't found anywhere else. And how much would it take for you to work exclusively for him?" Daniel listened, nodded, and said, "Come back inside. Let's talk." Yuna raised an eyebrow. She was expecting a threat, or a deal, or anger. He offered a conversation. She went back inside. They talked for 2 hours. Yuna turned out to be smart, very smart. She knew the prices of every commodity within a 5-city radius. She knew the caravan routes. She knew the names of all the major merchants and their weaknesses. She could calculate in her head faster than Daniel could on a calculator. Her father, the head of the Wanpak, controlled trade in the east. Everything that passed through Carvin passed through his hands. He had heard about the strange food from the wastes and was intrigued. He sent his daughter because he trusted her more than he trusted mercenaries. Daniel listened, he thought, and he saw an opportunity. He didn't need a patron. He needed a trading partner. Someone who could deliver what the terminal didn't provide. Wood, metal, cloth, tools, animals, in exchange for what the terminal provided, but the world didn't know about. Coffee, chocolate, spices, honey, premium flour. He didn't offer Yuna a deal with her father. He offered her a job to manage the camp's trade flows.
Yuna laughed. You're offering me to abandon my father and the guild for a job at a camp in the middle of the desert for 40 people. Daniel replied, No, I'm offering you something your father will never give you. A place where you're valued for who you are, not for your last name. Yuna stopped laughing. She looked at him, and he could tell he'd hit the mark, right on target. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, I'll think about it. And she left. A week later, she returned, with 3 carts of tools, with a letter from her father containing the terms of a trade agreement, and with a small leather trunk holding her personal belongings. She silently placed the trunk against the wall. She looked at Daniel and said, I've thought about it. Daniel nodded. He turned to Mira. With Yuna's arrival, the camp ceased to be a camp. It became a trading hub. Yuna worked like a machine. She drew up a table of exchange rates. Daniel's loaf of bread was equal to 2 measures of cloth. A serving of coffee was equal to a measure of iron nails. A jar of honey was equal to a leather belt and 3 meters of rope. She devised a system that didn't exist in Altera. Fixed prices. In this world, every transaction was a haggle. Buyer and seller argued until they were hoarse. Yuna said no. There is one price, for everyone, always. Take it or leave it. At first, the merchants were outraged. Then they got used to it. Then they appreciated it. Because a fixed price means predictability, and predictability means trust, and trust means money. Yuna understood this intuitively. Daniel understood it from experience. His old warehouse had the same system. Contract, price, volume. No surprises. When he explained the concept of a contract to her in the language of Altera, interspersed with gestures, she looked at him and said, You're from a place where people are smarter than here. He shook his head. Not smarter. They've just been trading longer. By the 80th day, the population had grown to 53. The stream of exiles didn't stop. But now others were coming too. Artisans from small villages ravaged by poor harvests, wandering laborers, single women with children, elderly couples with no one to feed them. Everyone received a bowl. Everyone received a spot by the wall. Everyone was asked a question. What can you do? One man said he could weave baskets. Daniel said, Weave. Another said he could cut stone. Daniel said, Cut. A woman said she could weave. Daniel said, The loom will be here in 2 weeks. Wait and help in the kitchen for now. Everyone took their place in the system, like merchandise on a shelf. Everyone in their place. Everyone is needed. Ariel kept track of the people. Name, where from, what they can do, health status, special needs. She wrote with charcoal on flat stones. Then Daniel ordered paper on the terminal. Plain white paper. And pencils. The terminal dispensed them. Stationery was listed in the catalog under Basic Supplies. Ariel picked up a pencil. She turned it over in her hand. She tried it out. The line was thinner and clearer than with charcoal. She looked at Daniel. He shrugged. It's a pencil. An ordinary thing. For her, it was a small miracle. The garden beds were growing. The tomatoes had grown 20 centimeters. Green, strong. The carrots had sprouted tops. The basil produced its first leaves. The earth seeds in Altera's soil took root. The white root from the local seeds was growing too, faster than the earth crops, accustomed to this climate. Daniel expanded the garden. Now 6 people tended the beds. He showed them how to water, how to loosen the soil, how the distance between rows affects the harvest. Simple things he knew from articles he'd read by chance during night shifts at the warehouse. When he was bored, he read everything in sight. Articles about agriculture, about cooking, about food chemistry, about food preservation. Useless knowledge for a logistics specialist who would never be a farmer. Now, every bit of that knowledge was worth lives. On the 91st day, what Daniel had both been waiting for and feared happened. Taryn woke him up in the middle of the night.
His face was serious. His voice was quiet. People on the horizon, lots of them, with lights, coming from the west. Daniel went outside the wall. He stood on a rock. He looked. In the west, in the darkness, points of light were moving. Torches. 10, 15, maybe 20. Too many for a caravan, too organized for refugees. They were marching in formation. About a 2-hour journey away. They'll be here by dawn. Daniel returned to camp. He woke Ariel. She looked at the torches and her face paled. "It's not the temple," she said. "Too early for a temple." "They're mercenaries, most likely from the Merchants Guild. Not from Yuna's father, from another one. One that didn't get access to food and decided to take it by force." Daniel woke Yuna. She cursed. Then she looked and cursed again. "Those are Garza's men," she said. "The head of the Western Trade Branch, my father's competitor. He found out about our exchange and decided it would be easier to take it than to negotiate." Daniel nodded. "How many do you estimate there are?" Yuna squinted. She counted the torches. 25, maybe 30, professionals, armed. They've been marching through the wastelands for 3 days. Daniel repeated the last part. 3 days through the wastelands. 3 days in the heat, across the sand, without proper water. He looked at Yuna, then at Ariel, and smiled. For the first time in 3 months, Yuna frowned. "What's so funny?" Daniel replied. They hadn't eaten a hot meal in 3 days. The plan was simple. So simple that Ariel looked at him like he was crazy. Yuna shook her head. Taryn clenched his fists and said he'd rather die with a sword. Daniel said, "No. My plan, my responsibility. If it doesn't work, run to the cliffs." The terminal is inside. The door is heavy. It'll hold. He spent the rest of the night at the terminal, ordering, counting. He prepared. Meyer helped, silently, without questions. She carried water and food from the serving window to the exit. Her hands trembled, but her face was calm. She trusted him, completely, without reservation, because he hadn't deceived her once in 3 months. He had never promised what he couldn't deliver. If he said there would be food, then there was food. If he said there would be a wall, then the wall stood. If he said the plan would work, then the plan would work. At dawn, the mercenaries approached the camp. Daniel stood at the gate, alone, unarmed. Behind him was a wall 1.5 meters high and 53 men watching from behind it. The mercenaries stopped 30 paces. There were 28 of them. Men, armed, swords, spears, leather armor, faces darkened by the sun and wind, eyes red from the sand, chapped lips. The commander stood at the front, broad-shouldered, with 2 swords at his belt. He looked at Daniel. Daniel, a skinny guy in dirty clothes, unarmed. And he smirked. He said, "You're the one with the magical food. Give us the source and you'll live. Everyone will live." Daniel looked at him, then at his men. 28 pairs of red eyes, 28 cracked mouths, 28 empty flasks on their belts. He saw it. Like a logistics officer sees empty shelves, like a doctor sees symptoms. They were at their limit. 3 days in the desert had wrung them out like a rag. They were still standing, still holding their weapons. But in 6 hours under this sun, half of them would collapse. Daniel raised his hand, turned toward the gate, nodded. And Meyer came out from behind the wall with a tray. On the tray were 28 clay mugs filled with water, cold, clean water, and 28 pieces of bread, fresh, soft, smelling so good that the wind carried the scent to the mercenaries before they even saw the food. Meyer set the tray on the ground in front of the gate. She bowed. She went back behind the wall. Daniel said, "Eat first, then we'll talk." The commander looked at the tray, at the bread, at the water, then at Daniel. "A trap," he said. Daniel shrugged. 28 portions of bread and water? If this is a trap,
It's the tastiest one of your life." Silence hung heavy for a long time. Then one of the mercenaries in the back rows couldn't take it anymore. He was younger than the rest. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He stepped forward, took a mug. He downed it in one gulp, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, took the bread, took a bite, chewed. His eyes closed. A second mercenary stepped forward, a third, a fourth. One by one, they approached the tray, took water and bread, drank, ate. The commander stood last. His face was stony. He watched as his men ate the bread given by the enemy. Then he looked at Daniel. Daniel stood calmly, waiting. The commander approached the tray. He took the last mug, the last piece of bread. He drank slowly. He ate slowly. When he had finished, he turned to Daniel. His eyes were different. Not softer, just different. He said, "Why?" Daniel replied, "Because a hungry man makes bad decisions. A full man makes the right ones. Eat, think, then decide." The commander was silent. His men sat on the ground. They ate bread, they drank water. Some asked for more. Meyer brought out a second tray, then a third. By noon, 14 of the 28 mercenaries had decided to stay. The commander left with the rest, silently, without threats, without promises to return. He just left. 14 of his former men sat inside the walls and ate hot soup. Among them was a woman, tall, with a scar across her eyebrow, with a limp in her left leg. She sat apart from the others. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She ate in silence. When Daniel approached her, she looked up at him with a hard, direct gaze. He asked, "What's your name?" "Kyra Ven," she replied. Her voice was low, hoarse from the desert wind. Daniel nodded. "What can you do?" She looked at her hands, large, scarred, hands that had held a sword for many years, to kill. She said it simply, without bravado, as a matter of fact. Daniel looked at her. Then he said, "You don't need to kill here, but you do need to defend. There's a difference." She thought for a long time, then she nodded. That evening, Daniel walked around the camp. He counted the people, 67. There had been an overuse of rations of the mercenaries, but the terminal held up. 119 rations covered both the old-timers and the new arrivals. Tomorrow, we need to review the rations. Start taking physical exertion into account. Those who build walls need more calories than those who sew. Food logistics, his specialty. He walked over to the shelter where Kyra was sitting. She hadn't been sleeping. She was sitting in the dark. Her sword lay nearby. Daniel went back to the terminal. He ordered miso soup, a small portion, hot. He took it to Kyra, set it in front of her, said, "It goes down well after a long journey." She looked at the bowl. Steam rose into the night air. She took the bowl, took a sip, and her face twitched, barely noticeable, like a crack in stone. She drank in small sips, slowly, eyes closed. When she finished, she set the bowl down, looked at Daniel, and said quietly, "This is the first time in 4 years that food has tasted good." Daniel didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He saw her hands, saw the scars. Kyra got things in order in 2 weeks. Out of 14 former mercenaries, she selected 8 who still remembered what discipline was. She sent the other 6 to work on construction. They didn't argue. Kyra didn't yell or threaten them. She just watched. And that look was enough. Daniel watched as she set up the guard. 2 at the gate, 2 on the cliff. Shifts every 4 hours. Night watches. Morning patrols of the wall. She did it in silence, methodically, like someone who had stood guard their whole life and knew the value of every minute spent not staring into the darkness. Daniel approached her one evening. She was standing by the wall, looking west. He stood beside her. They were silent. Then he said, "I need a head of security. Not temporary, permanent." Kyra looked at him, looked at the wall, looked at the people beyond the wall. Children playing by the hearth, an old man with a stick who was carving a spoon from a piece of wood brought by the merchants.
Meyer carrying water from the terminal. Then she looked at Daniel again and said one word. Yes. The 100th day, Daniel stood in front of the terminal and looked at the screen. Energy 68%, 119 rations, 67 people, consumption stable, supplies in the pit for 5 days. Their own garden beds yielded the first harvest of white root, 20 kilograms. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The sheep were doing well, 7 head, 1 pregnant. Trade was going strong. Yuna managed 3 caravans a month. The wall stood. Security is in place. Ariel handles accounting and diplomacy. Meyer manages the warehouse with him. Kyra defends the perimeter. Everything was working. For now. But Daniel looked at the screen and saw a number that troubled him. 68%. The 6th panel was holding. The stone shield against the sand was working. But the 7th one couldn't be repaired. A crack ran across the entire surface. And that meant 68 was the ceiling. 119 rations was the maximum. If the population exceeded 60, there wouldn't be enough for 3 meals a day. He needed another solution. He found it in the terminal's catalog. The section he had been flipping through earlier. Agricultural additives, fertilizers, growth stimulants, concentrated nutrient mixtures for soil. The terminal could dispense more than just ready-made food. It could dispense the means to grow food. Daniel sat and calculated for 2 hours. If, instead of some of the ready-made portions, he ordered fertilizers and seeds, and plant them in the ground, then, in 2 months, his own garden would yield enough that he could cut back on ready-made food orders at the terminal, free up capacity, redirect it to fertilizers. A closed loop. The terminal feeds people while the crop grows. The harvest frees up the terminal. The terminal provides fertilizers for the next harvest. And so on, spiraling upward. Logistical optimization. His favorite thing. He started immediately. Ordered a batch of fertilizer, bags of granules. The instructions on the packaging were in Korean. He translated them for Ariel. She wrote them down. So many grams per square meter. Dilute in water. Water at the roots, not on the leaves. They cleared a new plot, bigger than before, 10 by 10 meters. They dug it up, applied the fertilizer, planted rice, real rice, from the terminal's seeds, rice that grows in Korea, in Elterra's soil, with fertilizer from the future. Daniel stood at the edge of the field and thought about how absurd it all looked, and how perfectly logical it all was. The terminal creates a product from energy. The sun provides energy. The soil provides the environment. Fertilizer provides nourishment. Seeds provide potential. People's labor binds it all together. A system. Beautiful. Functional. His system. Lena Morgan arrived on the 110th day. Daniel didn't immediately realize who she was. Short. Calm. Dark hair with a streak of gray. Attentive eyes. She wasn't an outcast. She wasn't a refugee. She was a wanderer, a herbalist, a healer. She traveled through villages and treated people with herbs, with infusions, with incantations, with what worked and what only seemed to work. She came because the rumor had reached her too. A man in the wastelands treats dehydration without magic. She wanted to see for herself. Daniel showed her an empty packet of rehydration solution. He explained, salt, sugar, potassium, water, in the right proportions. Lena took the packet. She couldn't read it, Korean, but she sniffed the contents, tasted it with the tip of her tongue, thought, and said, salt and sweetness together. That's against my rules. But it works. I saw the result. The girl you saved, she's alive. She's healthy. She would have died with me. I wouldn't have had this powder. Daniel looked at her. She was 28, but her eyes were older. The eyes of someone who had watched people die many times and couldn't help. He led her to the terminal. He showed her the catalog, the medicine section. She didn't read Korean. He translated. Antibiotics, fever reducers, painkillers, anti-inflammatories, antiseptics, bandages, band-aids, vitamins. He explained every word as best he could. This kills the tiny enemies in the blood that you can't see with the naked eye. This brings down the fever. This stops the pain. Lena listened. Her expression changed. With each new description, something shifted inside her. She asked questions, precise ones, smart ones. How much to give a child? How much for an adult? How often? What if it doesn't help? She thought like a doctor, not like a folk healer, like a doctor without instruments, who had treated people blindly all his life and suddenly gained the ability to see. She stayed. Of course she stayed. She and Daniel worked out a system. He provides the medicine, she determines who needs what. He doesn't know the local diseases, she doesn't know his medicines. Together, they covered both sides. She explained everything simply to the patients. A new herb from the east, very strong. Swallow it without chewing. People believed her. Lena was a familiar figure, an herbalist, a healer. They knew her. They trusted her methods. No one was bothered that she gave a white pill instead of a green decoction. The main thing was that it worked. On the 120th day, Lena saved her first child, a 5-year-old boy, the son of one of the women in the camp. A fever. The fever hadn't broken for 3 days. In Elterra, that meant one thing: death. Childhood fever killed 1 in 3. Lena knew this better than anyone. She had lost dozens of such children. Decoctions didn't help. Compresses didn't help. Prayers didn't help. Daniel ordered a fever reducer on the terminal, a children's dose, syrup, sweet, with a fruit flavor. Lena gave the child a spoonful. An hour later, the fever broke. 3 hours later, the boy opened his eyes. 6 hours later, he asked for food. His mother sat beside him and cried. Lena stood at the exit of the shelter. Daniel walked over to her. She didn't turn around. Her shoulders were tense. Her hands were clenched. He could see she was holding on with her last ounce of strength, because if she let go, she would fall. He stood beside her, silently. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there. A minute later, she said quietly, without turning around, 10 years. For 10 years, I've watched them die. Every time I thought that next time I'd find the right herb, the right root, the right word. I never found it. And now this powder, this sweet water, and the child is alive. She fell silent. Her voice trembled. Daniel said, "You had the hands, but you didn't have the tools. It's not your fault." Lena turned to him. Her eyes were red. She wasn't crying. She was holding it together. She said, "How can I thank you for this?" He shook his head. "Don't. Just heal." She nodded, turned away, went to the patient. Her back was straight, like someone who finally knows what they're living for. By the 131st day, the camp had changed. It wasn't a camp anymore. It was a settlement. 78 people. The wall was reinforced with a second layer, 3 gates instead of 1. A well, a real well. Taryn led a crew of 10 men who dug for 3 weeks. They found water at a depth of 8 meters. Salty, not drinkable as is, but suitable for irrigation, for domestic needs too. Daniel set up a filtration system using sand and charcoal, the simplest filter. The water passes through a layer of sand and then through a layer of charcoal. It comes out cleaner. Not perfect, but good enough for washing and laundry. Drinking water still came from the terminal, but the well took some of the load off. 10 portions of water a day instead of 20. 10 portions that could be spent on something else. Every little thing in the system mattered. Every optimization yielded a resource, and every resource was put to use. The rice had sprouted. Daniel stood at the edge of the field and watched. Thin green stalks, neat rows, earth rice in the soil of Elterra, with fertilizers from the future, watered with water from a well dug by the exiles. He crouched down, touched a stalk. Strong, healthy,
This rice would yield a harvest in 2 months, maybe a month and a half if the fertilizers worked to their full potential. His first rice, independent of the terminal. He stood up. He looked at the settlement. Walls, shelters, fireplaces, a well, fields, people. The system he had built, stone by stone, decision by decision, day by day. It worked. For now, it worked. But Ariel had said 6 months. 4 months had passed. 2 left, maybe less. He looked west. There, beyond the horizon, were cities, temples, armies, the king, and the drought creeping forward and devouring all life.
He turned and walked toward the terminal to check the supplies, to recalculate the rations, update the plan. The work never ended. He didn't want it to end either. Work was what kept him going. Work and the bowl Mire placed on the warm stone every evening. For him. Without a reminder, without a request. Simply because she knew he would forget to eat if no one reminded him. And she remembered. Every day. Sammy Ride climbed over the wall at night. She was small, skinny, agile as a lizard. The guard on the wall didn't notice. Kyra later said a few words to him, which made him turn pale. But that night, the girl slipped past the guards. She crept up to the storage pit. She opened the lid and began stuffing her pockets with everything in sight. Crackers, dried meat, a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. She moved quickly and quietly, like a pro. It wasn't her first time. These were hands that had been stealing since she was 5. Kyra caught her on her way out, grabbed her by the scruff of the neck, lifted her up. The girl struggled, bit down. Kyra didn't let go. Brought her to Daniel like a kitten, holding her at arm's length, set her down in front of him. "A thief," Kyra said. Daniel looked down. A girl, 16 years old, maybe younger, dirty, in rags, hair like a crow's nest, eyes like a cornered animal. She looked at him and waited for the blow. Her body was tense, ready for pain, habitually ready, like a body that has been beaten often and for a long time. Daniel crouched down, to be at her level. He looked into her eyes. She didn't look away. Stubborn, angry, hungry. He said, "What's your name?" She was silent. He waited. She was silent. Kyra stood behind her, arms crossed, waiting for an order, what to do with her. Kick her out, tie her up, punish her. Daniel stood up and turned toward the hearth. He stoked the coals, put water on to boil. When the water came to a boil, he added the rice, added pieces of meat, soy sauce, stirred it. 10 minutes later, he took it off the heat, scooped it into a bowl, set it in front of the girl. He sat down across from her. He said, "Eat." She looked at the bowl, then at him, then at Kyra. She was waiting for a trick, a trap, poison food, anything. Because in her world, free food didn't exist. Never, not once. Every bite in her life had been stolen or earned through things she didn't want to remember. Daniel waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't coax her. He just sat across from her and waited. 2 minutes later, she sat down. She took the bowl. She ate the first spoonful slowly, carefully, like an animal testing the bait. The second, faster. The third, even faster. By the 5th spoonful, she was already eating greedily, choking, swallowing without chewing. Her eyes were wet, not from tears, from the fact that her body had finally gotten what it needed. When the bowl was empty, she set it on the ground. She looked at Daniel. Her lower lip was trembling, but her eyes were dry. She wasn't crying. She'd forgotten how. A long time ago. "Sammy," she said, quietly, hoarsely. "My name is Sammy." Daniel nodded, looked at Kira, said, "Let her go." Kira raised an eyebrow. Daniel repeated, "Let her go. She's not locked up." Kira stepped back. Daniel turned to Sammy. He said, "You can leave. Take what you stole. I won't catch you. Or you can stay, eat 3 times a day, sleep under a roof, but then you don't steal. Not from us or anyone else."
Sammy looked at him. Her fingers clenched the edge of an empty bowl. She was thinking. He could see the thoughts flashing in her eyes. Leave and be free and hungry, or stay and be full and bound by rules. For a girl who had spent her whole life surviving on her own, it was an impossible choice. She said, "What if I stay and steal later?" Daniel replied, "Then I'll sit you down at the table again and feed you, and I'll ask you again if you want to stay." She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Kira. Kyra stood with a stony expression. Sammy looked back at Daniel and said, "Fine, I'll stay. But if you trick me, I'll set your wall on fire." Daniel nodded seriously. "It's a deal." Sammy turned out to be more valuable than anyone could have imagined. She knew the wastelands, not from a map, from her feet. She'd been walking here for 3 years, knew every trail, every water source, every place to hide from a storm. And she knew the cities, Carvin, Morden. She'd been there. She'd stolen there. She knew the back alleys and the markets and the guards and the shift schedules. Daniel listened and memorized. Then he asked Kyra, "You can train her." Kyra looked at Sammy. Sammy looked at Kyra. 2 pairs of hard eyes met. Kyra said, "She's quick, quiet, brazen. She'll make a good scout. Or a dead scout. Depends on whether she learns to obey." Sammy bared her teeth. Kyra didn't flinch. Training began the next day. But Daniel did one more thing for Sammy. Quiet, unobtrusive. That same evening, he approached a woman who was cooking in the communal kitchen. He said a few words to her. The next morning, there was a bowl on the kitchen counter, covered with a flat plate. It contained rice with a piece of sweet flatbread. Nothing specific, just sitting there. If anyone was hungry, they could take it. Sammy found it on the 3rd day. She went into the kitchen at night, out of habit, not to steal, just to check. And she saw the bowl. She opened it. Rice and flatbread. Fresh. She looked around. No one there. She took the bowl, ate it, put it back. Empty. The next day, the bowl was full again. And the next. And a week later. Every day, without fail. Sammy checked every morning. Sometimes in the afternoon. Sometimes late at night. The bowl was full. Always. She didn't ask who was doing it. Didn't say thank you. She didn't talk about it. But Daniel saw how her demeanor changed. How she stopped hiding food in her pockets. How she started eating at the common table without looking around. How once she herself put a piece of fruit in the bowl for the next person. Whoever came into the kitchen hungry in the middle of the night would find something. Because Sammy knew what it was like to search and not find. And now she made sure no one else had to experience it. By the 150th day, Daniel noticed that something had changed in the air. Literally. The wind from the east had become drier, hotter. Before, there used to be dew on the rocks in the mornings. Now there wasn't. Before, it used to cool down to a pleasant chill at night. Now the heat lingered, even in the dark. He climbed up onto the rock. He looked east. The horizon was strange. Yellow. Not sand. Something else. Like a haze. Ariel climbed up after him, stood beside him, looked. Her face grew serious. "Drought," she said. "It's coming. Faster than I thought." Daniel stared at the yellow horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond that haze, the earth was dying. The wells were drying up, the fields were turning to dust, the rivers were becoming streams, the streams were becoming mud, the mud was becoming salt, and this wave was coming here, toward them, but it wouldn't stop at them. It would go further, west, toward the cities, toward the capital, toward the millions of people who don't yet know what awaits them. Daniel came down. He gathered his people. Ariel, Yuna, Kairu, Taryn, Meyer, Lena. 6 people. His inner circle. Those whom he trusted not just with work, but with decisions. He spoke for 10 minutes. in the language of Elterra, which he now knew well enough to explain complex matters. The drought will be here in a month, not in 2, in a month. When it arrives, it will be hotter and drier than it is now. The harvest might not survive. The well might run dry. But that's only half the trouble. In 2 months, it will reach the western cities. And then the panic will begin. Famine, riots, and people will flee. Where? To the east, to the wastelands. Because in the east, there is a place where they feed people. Hundreds of people. Maybe thousands. Thousands of hungry, frightened people. And 119 portions a day. He looked around at everyone. Yuna did the math in her head. Her face went pale. Kyra clenched her jaw. Taryn lowered his eyes. Meyer looked at Daniel and waited. Lena was silent. Ariel was silent. Daniel continued. We have a month. In that month, we need to do 3 things. First, harvest everything we can. Everything that grows. Rice, root vegetables, tomatoes, greens. Harvest and preserve them. Dried sheep meat, salted fish, if we can get it through the traders. A 3-month supply for 100 people, at a minimum. Second, expand the well. Dig it deeper. Maybe dig a second one. We need water that doesn't depend on the terminal. Third, prepare the camp for defense. Not against the army, against the mob. A hungry mob is more dangerous than an army. An army follows orders. A mob does not. We need higher walls, supplies inside, an evacuation plan into the rock toward the terminal if the walls don't hold. He fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes were watching him. Then Kyra stood up. She said, "The walls. I'll take care of them." Taryn stood up. "The harvest and the well. I'll handle them." Yuna, trade supplies. I'll take stock of everything. Lena, medicines. We need a stockpile for mass arrivals. Ariel, diplomacy. If we can negotiate with any of the lords before the chaos begins, now is the time. Meyer was the last to stand up. She looked at Daniel. She said, "The warehouse. I'll be at the warehouse, as always." Daniel nodded. To everyone, one by one, they knew their places. They knew their tasks. They were ready. Work was in full swing, day and night. The walls had grown by 1/2 meter, now 2 meters, with platforms for lookouts on top. The well was deepened another 3 meters. The water flow increased, slightly less salty. The entire harvest was gathered. The rice yielded more than expected. The fertilizers worked. 200 kilograms, plus 80 kilograms of white root, plus tomatoes, plus carrots, plus greens. Daniel organized the preservation, canning, salting, drying, methods he knew from his past life. FIFO, first in, first out. Eat the old stuff first, put the new stuff at the back of the line. People listened and repeated these words without understanding their meaning in Korean, but grasping the principle. Gradually, the camp slang was enriched with strange words: rotation, receiving, write-off. Daniel heard Taryn tell the new guy, "Bring a bag from receiving," and he smiled. The Salt Spring brand. Salt Spring. That's what the old man with the cane called the settlement. Because there's salt here, and there's a spring here, and because nothing grows from salt. But they had grown. The name stuck. Merchants spread it throughout Carvin. From Carvin, it went further. Salt Spring, a place in the wastes where they feed you. Where they heal you. Where they don't ask who you are. Where they don't hang up signs. Daniel heard Ariel telling newcomers about the settlement. And not once did he hear her mention his name. She said, "We built it. We raised it. We made it. Not him. Us." He noticed that, and he was grateful. The rumors reached the temple faster than Ariel had predicted. Not in 3 months, in 2.5. On the 160th day, Sammy returned from a reconnaissance mission to Carvin, out of breath, with worry in her eyes. She said, "There's a temple delegation in town. 5 priests. With guards. They're questioning the merchants. About the wastelands, about food, about the man by the cliff. Yuna confirmed it. Her people in Carven had sent word. A delegation from High Priest Kalden himself. Not a punitive force, not yet. Reconnaissance. They want to understand what's happening before deciding what to do. Ariel sat against the wall and said nothing. Her face was impassive, but her hands on her knees were clenched into fists. She knew Kalden. She had served him. She knew how he thought. He doesn't act rashly. He doesn't act on impulse. First, he gathers information. Then, he makes a decision. And once a decision is made, he doesn't back down. Ever. Daniel listened. He nodded. He asked Ariel what he would do when he found out. Ariel thought. She answered slowly. He would declare the salt spring a heresy. Food without the gift is a violation of the divine order. He would demand that the lords of the nearest provinces cease trade with us. Merchants who do business with us would be declared accomplices to heresy. If we do not submit and surrender the source of our food, he will assemble a crusade. Not an army, a temple crusade, warrior priests, earth mages, volunteers from the faithful. This will not be a war, it will be a purification, in the eyes of the temple. Daniel listened. Then he asked, "How much time do we have?" Ariel calculated.
A month from intelligence to decision. 2 weeks from decision to declaration of heresy. From the declaration to the campaign, another month. 2.5 months total. But the drought will shift the timeline. If the cities start starving, Kalden might speed things up, or slow them down. It depends on what he sees. Daniel stood up. He walked through the camp. 83 people. 2-meter walls. 2 months' worth of supplies. The harvest in the ground. The second well is almost ready. 8 guards under Kyra's command. 1 terminal serving 119 rations a day. Against the temple with its mages and army of believers. The math isn't in his favor. He won't win head-on, never. But he never intended to fight head-on. He intended to win the way logisticians. Not by force, by time, by supplies, by calculation, by knowing what the enemy doesn't know. And the enemy doesn't know the most important thing. A drought is coming. And it's coming faster than anyone thinks. He called a council. Ariel, Yuna, Kyra, Taryn, Meyer, Lena, Sammy. 7 of them. He laid out a map before them. A real one. Ariel had drawn it over the past few weeks. A detailed one, with cities, roads, rivers. He placed a pebble where the salt spring was, a second on Carven, a third on Morden, a 4th on Velton, a 5th on Eltaris, the capital. Then he ran his finger from east to west. Drought. It's here now. It'll be here in a month. In 2 months, here. In 3, here. His finger stopped on the capital. Everyone looked at the map. Then he placed a red pebble on the temple's location and said, "Kalden thinks I'm his main enemy. He's wrong. His main enemy is time. In 3 months, his priests will be starving along with everyone else, and then he won't have time for campaigns. He'll need food. Our food." Yuna was the first to understand. "You want to stall for time," she said. Daniel nodded. 2.5 months until the campaign. 3 months until famine in the capital. I need to buy half a month. Half a month. 15 days. If I can hold Kalden back for 15 days longer than he plans, by the time he's ready to strike, his own men will start begging for food, and the campaign will fall apart. Kyra asked, "How are you going to stall for time?" Daniel turned to Ariel. "You know the temple procedures, the declaration of heresy. It's a formal process. There are rules, stages, votes." "Right." Ariel nodded slowly. "Right. The Council of Priests. 3 votes, a week apart. If even 1 vote is against it, the process is delayed for an investigation. Another 2 weeks. Daniel smiled. "Is there a priest on the council who will vote against it?" Ariel thought. "For a long time."
Then she said quietly, "Priestess Alora. Old, stubborn. She doesn't like Calden, doesn't like hasty decisions. If you give her a reason to doubt, she'll drag out the process on principle." Daniel nodded. "Then let's give her a reason." He turned to Yuna. "Your father."
The head of the Carvana Trade Guild. He does business with the temple. That's right. Yuna nodded. The temple buys fabric for robes from the guild. A monthly contract, Daniel said. Ask your father to delay the next shipment by 2 weeks. Tell him there are, with logistics, roads, caravans, the wastelands. Plausible. Yuna narrowed her eyes. Why? Daniel replied. When the temple goes without new robes for 2 weeks, the priests will start to get nervous. A small thing, but small things add up. An irritated council makes decisions more slowly. Yuna smiled. I see. Death by 1,000 little things. Daniel nodded. He turned to Sammy. I need intel from Morden, the temple outpost. How many priests, how many guards, what food supplies, how often they're restocked. Sammy grinned. Consider it done. Daniel raised a finger. Just look. Don't steal, don't touch, don't get caught. Sammy rolled her eyes. I know. Kyra stood nearby, watching her with a stern gaze.
Sam added, I know, and I'll be careful. Kyra nodded. The next 3 weeks were the most tense since Salt Spring's founding. On the surface, everything went on as usual. People worked, they built, they ate, but beneath the surface, other work was underway. Yuna corresponded with her father via caravans. Sammy went out on reconnaissance and returned with information. Ariel wrote letters, anonymous ones, addressed to the priestess Alora. There were no threats in them, no accusations, only questions. Is it true that in the eastern villages, children are starving? Is it true that the temple refused to help them? Is it true that the gift of the earth is weakening? Questions to which Alora knew the answers, but which no one dared to ask aloud. Ariel knew which words were needed. She was a priestess. She knew the system from the inside. She knew where the system's seams lay. And the drought was coming. Every week, the horizon in the east grew yellower, the wind hotter, the earth grew drier. On the 170th day, the stream, 20 kilometers south of the salt spring, dried up. On the 175th day, the first caravan from Carven arrived with news. Grain prices in the city had tripled. The wells on the outskirts had run dry. The residents began to leave. Some headed west toward the capital. Some headed east toward them. On the 180th day, 20 people arrived in Salt Spring in a single day. Not outcasts, ordinary people, peasants, artisans, families, with children, with carts, with their accumulated belongings. They didn't come because they've been driven out. They came because there was nothing left to eat. The population had surpassed 100. Daniel stood at the gate and watched the stream of people. 102 people. 119 portions. The math was getting tight, but their own harvest helped. Rice, root vegetables, goat's milk from 2 goats traded for from a caravan a month ago. Altogether, that yielded about 80 more servings a day, 200 in total. Enough for 100 people, not enough for 200. And there would be 200 in a month, if not sooner. He returned to the terminal, sat down, thought. A third solution was needed. The terminal plus the harvest plus something else. He flipped through the catalog and found it, a section he had previously ignored. Preservation and fermentation. The terminal could dispense not only ready-to-eat food, it could dispense starter cultures, bacterial cultures, for pickling, for fermentation, for making soy sauce, miso, kimchi, vinegar, alcohol, products that keep for months, years, that don't depend on electricity, that can be made by hand from local ingredients with the addition of starter cultures from the terminal. Fermentation. The oldest preservation technology, the one his ancestors had used for thousands of years, and which didn't exist in Alterra.
He started that very day. Ordered a culture for miso, soybeans from the terminal, rice, salt, mixed them together, put the mixture in a clay pot, covered it with a cloth, placed it in a warm place. Miso takes months to mature, but the process is underway. At the same time, he ordered kimchi starter. Local white root will replace cabbage. Salt, pepper, garlic from the terminal. 3 days of fermentation. Quick results. 3 days later, he opened the pot. The smell hit his nose. Sour, spicy, lively. He tasted it. Not perfect. White root isn't Napa cabbage. The texture is different. The taste is different. But the principle works. A fermented vegetable. It keeps for weeks without a fridge, full of beneficial bacteria, nutritious, and you don't need a terminal to make it. Just the starter once. Then the process is self-sustaining. The culture lives and multiplies endlessly. On the 119th day, the temple declared the salt spring a heresy. Sammy brought the news from Morden. She had run for 2 days, almost without stopping. She stumbled through the gates, filthy and gasping for breath. Kyra caught her and sat her down. Meyer brought water. Sammy took a sip and began to speak. The Council of Priests had voted. 3 votes, as required. The first was unanimous, the second as well. On the third, the priestess Alora demanded an investigation. The process dragged on for 2 weeks, exactly as Ariel had calculated. But then, Calden personally addressed the council. He spoke for 3 hours, and Alora gave in. The vote passed. Salt Spring was declared a place of heresy. Trade with it is forbidden. Anyone who supplies goods to the settlement is considered an accomplice. The punishment is exile and confiscation of property. A temple campaign has been declared. The mobilization period is 1 month. Daniel listened. He nodded. Then he returned to Ariel. How much time had they gained? She calculated. 2 weeks of investigation, plus the delay with the fabrics from the Una Guild, had created another week of nervousness in the council. A total of 3 weeks. Calden had planned to declare heresy on the 170th day. He declared it on the 191st. The campaign would be ready in a month. The 220th day. According to Daniel's calculations, the drought would reach the western provinces on the 210th, the capital on the 230th. The gap had narrowed, but it was there. 10 days between the start of the famine in the west and the campaign's readiness. 10 days in which the world of Calden would begin to crumble. Daniel had hoped that would be enough, but trade had come to a halt. The blow was immediate. Una came to him, her face white with rage. 3 caravans had canceled their deliveries. Her father had sent a short letter. I cannot risk the guild. I'm sorry. Una held the letter in her hands, her fingers trembling, not from fear, from rage. Daniel took the letter, read it, put it on the table, said, He's right. Una looked up. He's right, she repeated. He abandoned us. Daniel shook his head. He's protecting his guild. 200 families, 1,000 people. He can't put them at risk for our sake. It's not betrayal, it's arithmetic. Una was silent. Her jaw was moving. She was biting the inside of her cheek, a habit from childhood. Then, she said quietly, I hate it when you're right. Daniel replied, Me too. Without trade, the settlement was losing access to wood, to metal, to fabric, to tools, to everything the terminal didn't provide. Daniel called a council meeting. He laid out the numbers. 2 months' worth of fabric. We have tools. Worn out, but they work. We'll run out of metal in a month. Nails, pickaxe tips, knife blades. Without metal, construction would stop. Kyra said, When the mercenaries left, they abandoned some of their gear. Armor. Old swords. We could reforge them. Daniel looked at her. Reforge them. We need a blacksmith. Kyra shrugged. There's one among her people. A former armorer. His hands remember. We need a bellows. And bellows, Taryn said. We'll build the bellows out of stone. The bellows from goat skin. Daniel nodded. Get to work. A week later, a forge was up and running in Salt Spring. Rough, primitive, but functional. A former armorer named Gert stood at the anvil and began turning rusty swords into hoe blades. The clang of metal echoed through the camp, a new sound, the sound of production. Daniel stood nearby and watched as a strip of steel, under the hammer's blows, transformed from a weapon into a tool, from something used to kill into something used to feed. Symbolic. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it. On the 200th day, the drought reached them, not as an abstract threat, as a physical reality.
The temperature spiked. The air became so dry that skin cracked within hours. The wind from the east carried not sand, but fine white dust. Salt. Daniel recognized it, the same salt that had been on the plain where he woke up. The drought devoured the earth and spat out salt. The crops in the fields suffered. The tomatoes turned yellow. The leaves curled up. The basil dried out in 2 days. Only white root vegetables and rice held up. The local crops proved tougher than Earth's under these conditions. Daniel ordered the beds to be covered with fabric. Canopies were to be stretched over the fields. Watering was to be done only at dawn and dusk, when evaporation was minimal. Every drop of water counted. The well had run dry. It hadn't completely dried up, but the level had dropped by a meter. There was enough water, but the supply had dwindled. Daniel put the settlement on a strict rationing schedule. Drinking water from the terminal. Rationed. 2 liters per person per day.
Household water from the well, 1 liter per person. Bathing once every 3 days. Laundry once a week. Watering the fields from the well according to the schedule. Not a drop wasted. He wrote out a schedule, hung it by the well. Mir kept an eye on compliance. No exceptions. Not even for him. When he once took an extra mug of water to wash his face after working on the wall, Mir looked at him, silently. He put the mug back. She nodded. Rules for everyone. He'd said it himself. Now he followed them himself. People kept coming. On the 205th day, there were 120 of them. On the 210th, 140. The flow was growing stronger. Now they weren't coming one by one or in families. They were coming in groups of 20 and 30. Entire villages were uprooting themselves and heading east, toward the rumor, toward hope, toward a place where they feed people. Daniel stood at the gate every morning. He counted. 119 rations from the terminal, plus the harvest, plus fermentation, plus reserves. A total of about 250 rations a day. It was enough for 140 people. For 200, it would be tight. For 300, no. He had to make the decision he feared. Close the gate. Say no. Send people on. Where? Into the desert, to their deaths. He couldn't. He knew it. He'd known it from the moment he saw the first bowl Meyer placed before the dying girl. He wasn't the kind who closes the gates. But he was a logistician, and a logistician knows that resources are finite. He found a solution between yes and no, an in-between. He implemented a system. Every new person gets 3 days. 3 days of full rations, rest, water, medical care if needed. After 3 days, a choice. Stay and work, or get a week's worth of food and move on. To west, toward the cities that are still standing. Many stayed, but some left, with full bags, with hope. And with stories of a place in the wastelands where strangers feed strangers simply because they can. On the 215th day, news came from the west. Carvin is in a panic. The grain has run out in the markets. The wells have dried up. The garrison is confiscating the last supplies. People are fleeing. Some westward toward the capital, some eastward. The drought had crossed the wastes and moved deeper into the continent, just as Ariel had predicted, just as Daniel had calculated, right on schedule, give or take 5 days. He stood on a rock and looked west. Somewhere out there, Kalden was gathering his forces. Temple warriors, earth mages, volunteers.
to destroy the heresy, to destroy the place where they feed people without the gift. But his warriors want to eat too, and his mages drink water too, and his supply trains need grain too, grain that is no longer there. Daniel looked west and waited. He counted the days. Soon, very soon.
On the 220th day, Sammy ran up again, this time with a smile, a wide one, a wolfish one. She said, "The campaign has been postponed. Cowden can't get the supply train together. There are no provisions. The merchants aren't bringing any. The roads are clogged with refugees. Half the volunteers have gone home to feed their families." Daniel listened. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He nodded. "Postponed doesn't mean canceled. Cowden isn't the type to back down. He'll find a way. But time has been bought. Every day without the expedition is a day when the salt spring grows stronger. A day when another pot of fermented root ripens. Another row of rice fills with grain. Another person gets back on their feet after 3 days of rest and food and picks up a shovel." That evening, Daniel sat by the hearth, alone. Everyone had gone their separate ways. Meyer had gone to sleep. Ariel was working on a map. Yuna was counting supplies. Kyra was standing on the wall. Taryn was snoring under the canopy. Sammy had disappeared somewhere into the darkness, as usual. Lena was bandaging the injured arm of one of the builders. Daniel sat alone, staring at the embers. Orange. Warm. He was thinking about Cowden, about a man he had never seen, who wants to destroy everything he has built, and who, according to Ariel, is not a villain. A man of faith, a man of conviction, who sincerely believes that a world without the gift is a world without God, that free food makes people weak, that order is more important than mercy. Daniel understood this logic. He didn't agree with it, but he understood. At his old warehouse, there was a manager who said that free lunches for employees were a bad thing. It makes them complacent. Daniel didn't say anything back then. He stayed silent, as always. Now he won't stay silent. Now he'll respond. Not with words, with pots of food, with walls, with fields, with people who are still standing because someone put a bowl in front of them just in time. On the 230th day, Sammy arrived at the salt spring with a man no one expected. A priest. A young one. In tattered clothes, without the symbols of the order. Barefoot. Emaciated. He followed Sammy like a shadow. She found him halfway from Morden, lying by the road, unconscious. She gave him water from her flask. He came to. She brought him here. Kira intercepted them at the gate, hand on his sword, eyes hard. A priest, she said. That word sounded like a curse here. Half the people in Salt Spring had been exiled by the priest's decree. The priests had taken some people's children, some people's homes. From the old man with the cane, the priests had taken his wife. She was weak in the gift. They took her away. He never saw her again. A priest at the gate is not a guest. He is an enemy. Daniel stepped out. He looked at the priest. Young, about 20. His face gaunt, sunken eyes, burn marks on his hands. Not from the sun, from magic. He had been punished. Ariel approached. She looked at the burns. Her face paled. She knew what it was. Purification by fire. A ritual of punishment for apostate priests. Those who doubted. Those who asked the wrong question. Those who refused to obey an order. She looked at Daniel. He read everything he needed to in her eyes. This guy had been burned by his own people for not wanting to be like them. Daniel turned to Kira. He said, "Let him pass." Kira didn't move. Her eyes were dark. Daniel repeated more quietly, "Kira, let him through." She stepped back, silently, but her hand didn't leave the sword. The priest's name was Theo. He told his story 2 days later when he was able to speak. Lena treated his burns with ointment from the terminal, antibiotic ointment.
Theo was the junior priest at the Temple of Morden. When Caldin announced a campaign against the Salt Spring, Theo refused. Not publicly, quietly. He approached the abbot and said he couldn't go kill people for what they ate. The abbot reported it. Theo was punished. Purification by fire. Then exiled. To the wasteland. With burns on his hands. No water, no food. A familiar story. Daniel listened, his face unchanging, but his hands clenched under the table. He said, "You'll stay here." Theo looked up at him. His eyes were wet, but not from pain, from something else. Theo asked, "I'm a priest. Your people hate priests." "How will you explain it?" Daniel replied. "You're a former priest. Like Ariel. Like I'm a former logistics officer. Everyone here is a former something. What matters here is who you are now." Theo was silent. Then he said quietly, "I don't know who I am now." Daniel stood up. He walked to the terminal. He returned with a bowl. Hot soup. He set it in front of him. He said, "Right now, you're a person who eats soup. Start with that." Theo took the bowl. His bandaged hands were trembling. He ate slowly, and Daniel saw how, with every spoonful, something inside him was changing. It wasn't healing, but it was shifting, like a door opening a millimeter. Theo brought more than just his story. He brought information. Caldin didn't call off the campaign. He changed the plan. Instead of a large army, he's assembling a small detachment. 20 priests, warriors, elite ones, with earth magic. They won't lay siege to the walls. They'll cross the wastes quickly, find the source of food, and destroy it. Not the settlement, the source. Caldin realized it wasn't about the people. It was about where the food came from. Kill the source, and the settlement will die on its own. Daniel listened. His face went blank. 20 mages, against his walls, against his 8 guards. Earth mages can destroy stone, crumble a wall, split a rock, if they reach the terminal. Daniel looked at Ariel. She was pale. "When?" he asked. Theo answered, "They've already left, 5 days ago. It takes them 7 days to cross the wastes." 2 days left. 2 days. Daniel closed his eyes, opened them, stood up, gathered the council, all 7 of them, plus Theo. He spoke quickly, clearly, without emotion. 20 warrior priests, 2 days' journey. The goal is to destroy the terminal. We don't have the strength to stop them in battle. Earth mages are stronger than any of our fighters. Kyra nodded grimly. She had seen mages in action. 1 warrior priest is worth 10 ordinary soldiers. 20 is an army. Daniel continued. "We won't fight." Kyra looked up. Yuna frowned. Terran clenched his fists. Daniel raised his hand. "We won't fight because we'll win without a fight." "How?" Ariel asked. Daniel turned to Theo. "Ask," he said. "Warrior priests. They're crossing the wastes. 7 days. What's their water supply?" Theo thought. "A standard temple supply train. 1 flask per person per day, plus a spare barrel on the wagon." Daniel asked. "And food?" Theo replied. "Dried flatbread. Dried meat. Enough for 7 days with a small reserve." Daniel nodded. 7 days across the wastelands. With the current drought? In this heat? Their water supply is calculated for normal conditions, not for a drought. Theo froze. "Got it." Daniel continued. "The temperature has risen by 1/3 over the last month. Evaporation has increased. Sweating has increased. Their canteens are designed for normal heat, not this. On the 5th day, they'll start conserving water. On the 6th, they'll start suffering. On the 7th, they'll come to us, dehydrated and barely alive." Silence. Then Kyra said, "Just like mercenaries." Daniel nodded. "Just like mercenaries. Same situation, different scale." Yuna asked, "And you're going to feed them? The mages who came to destroy us?" Daniel looked at her. He said, "Yes." Yuna closed her eyes. She opened them.
She shook her head. You're crazy. Ariel was silent. Then she said quietly, It's not madness. It's the only plan that can work. If we fight, we'll lose. If we feed them, we'll force them to choose. Kill the people who saved your life or leave. For a priest, that's not just a choice. It's a matter of faith. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Calden sent them to destroy heresy. But heresy isn't a building. Heresy is an idea. The idea that food can be free, that the weak have a right to eat. You can destroy a terminal, but you can't destroy the bowl of soup you ate when you were dying of thirst. They spent 2 days preparing. Kyra posted lookouts along the entire perimeter of the cliffs. Sammy went east, to watch, to report any approach. Daniel worked at the terminal, ordering, counting. 20 portions of water, 20 portions of hot food, noodles in chicken broth. The very same. Simple, like at a roadside diner in Seoul. He knew what he was doing, not just feeding, choosing a. Hot noodles in broth after 7 days in the desert isn't just food, it's a revelation. It's warmth that enters through the throat and reaches the heart. He prepared it like a soldier prepares a position, carefully, with attention to every detail. Mira helped, silently. Her hands didn't tremble. She arranged the bowls on a large flat stone by the gate, in neat rows. 20 bowls, 20 pairs of chopsticks, 20 mugs of water. Like setting a table. Daniel looked at it, and his throat tightened for a second. She was setting the table for the people who were coming to kill them. At dawn on the 222nd day, Sammy returned. They're close. An hour's walk, maybe less. 20 people, barely moving. The wagon has fallen behind. No water. Daniel went out through the gate, alone, like last time with the mercenaries. But this time, Ariel was standing beside him. She insisted. She said, I know their language, ritual, temple. You won't be able to speak to them so they can hear you. I can. Daniel looked at her. She stood straight. Her light hair was pulled back. Her back was straight. Her face was calm. A former priestess who had returned to those who had cast her out. Not with vengeance, with bread. He nodded. They emerged from the morning mist. 20 figures, tall, in white robes, once white, now gray with dust and sweat. They were walking, but barely. Their steps were heavy, their shoulders slumped. Some leaned on staffs, earth mages, the temple's elite, people who could make a field bloom in an hour. Now they staggered with thirst in the middle of a dead desert. The gift of the earth does not work where the earth is dead. Their magic is useless in the wastelands. There is nothing to grow here, nothing to nourish. Their power has been reduced to nothing. Only people remain, tired, hungry, frightened, because they were used to being strong, and for the first time in their lives, they found themselves weak. Their commander walked in front, tall, gray-haired, with a staff in which a green stone sparkled, the symbol of the gift. He stopped, 20 paces away. He looked at Daniel, at Ariel. His eyes narrowed. He recognized her. A renegade, he said, his voice hoarse with thirst. Ariel didn't flinch. She replied in the temple language, a phrase Daniel didn't fully understand, but her tone was even, calm, respectful, and firm. The commander listened. His men stood behind him. Some were no longer standing. They sat on the ground. 2 lay down. Daniel looked at them. Then he turned. He gave a signal. From Meyer and Taryn and 4 others emerged from behind the wall, carrying trays. On each tray were bowls, hot noodles in chicken broth. Steam rose into the morning air. The scent drifted across the desert. 20 pairs of eyes stared at the trays. Daniel spoke in the language of Eltera, loudly, so all 20 could hear. You have walked for 7 days. You are tired.
You want to eat. We know why you have come, but first eat. Then we will talk." The commander was silent. His fingers clenched the staff. The green stone glowed dimly. He looked at the bowls, at the steam. He smelled the food. And Daniel saw the struggle in his eyes. Orders, duty, faith, and hunger. Simple human hunger, which doesn't listen to orders and doesn't believe in gods. One of the priests behind the commander stepped forward, reached for a bowl. The commander spun around. The priest froze, but did not back down. A second stepped forward. A third. They were people, just people, and they wanted to eat. The commander stood and watched as his elite squad, one by one, approached the trays and took the bowls, as they sat down on the ground, as they ate. It was pitiful. Burning themselves, spilling broth on their dusty clothes. How their faces changed. How the tension left their shoulders, how their staffs fell to the ground beside them. He was the last to stand, for a long time. Then he approached, took a bowl, sat down, and ate, silently, with his eyes closed. When he had finished the broth to the last drop, he opened his eyes. He looked at Daniel, and there was no hatred in his gaze, no anger, only weariness, and a question. Quiet, almost silent. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel answered, "Because a hungry man is not an enemy. He is simply hungry." Of the 20 priests, 14 remained. The commander left with 6, silently, no threats. Daniel gave them water and food for the return journey. Full flasks, full bags. The commander took them, didn't say thank you, didn't promise to return. He just took it and left. Daniel watched them go. 6 figures in white fading into the yellow haze to the west. They'll tell Calden, they'll tell him everything, that the settlement stands, that the walls are strong, that there are more than 100 people, that the food is real, and that they were fed. That last bit will hit hardest, not Calden, his people. Those who hear the word heresy and picture monsters. And now we'll hear that heretics are feeding those who came to kill them. The 14 priests who remained were a problem. Not for Daniel, for the rest. 140 people stared at the men in white robes with a hatred that had been building for years. The old man with the cane hadn't left the shed in 2 days. Several families demanded that the priests be driven out. One man walked up to the priest by the well and spat in his face. The priest stood and watched. He didn't move. His hands hung at his sides. Kira intervened. She broke it up. She came to Daniel with a grim expression. She said, "There will be blood if you don't decide." Daniel knew. He saw the tension mounting, how the stares grew heavier, how the silence by the hearth turned hostile when the priest walked past. He gathered everyone, all of Salt Spring, over 150 people, in the evening, by the central hearth. The fire burned brightly, faces orange in its light. Daniel stood before them. He was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, slowly, in the language of Elterra, which he now knew almost flawlessly. He said, "I know how you feel. I know what the temple has done to you, to your families, to your villages. I know because I too came here with a sign on my chest. Weak, do not feed." It was the temple that decided who to feed and who not to. The temple decided that the weak aren't worth a bowl of porridge. And so they told you that the priests must go, that they don't deserve food, that they are to blame. He fell silent. He scanned the crowd. 150 pairs of eyes, angry, hurt, frightened, waiting. He continued, "If we drive them out, we'll become what the temple was. We'll hang up a sign, 'Priest, do not feed.' And then everything we've built will be worth nothing, because we're no better. We're just the same." Silence. The fire crackled. Someone sniffled. An old man with a cane sat in the front row. He looked at Daniel. His eyes were wet, but he nodded. Slowly. Once. Daniel continued. There are no priests here. There are no outcasts here. There are people here who eat from one pot, who build one wall, who drink one water. Let those who were priests forget. Let those who were thieves forget. Let those who were weak, he touched his chest, where a plaque once hung. Let them forget. Here we start anew. Everyone. He fell silent. He stood. He waited. People exchanged glances. They whispered. Then the woman with the scarred face, the one who had arrived during the first week, stood up. She approached the nearest priest, a young man who was sitting off to the side and wouldn't look up. She held out a bowl to him, her own, filled with hot porridge. The priest looked up. He looked at the bowl. He looked at the woman. She nodded. He took it. His hands were shaking. The woman turned away. She went to the cauldron. She took a new portion for herself. She sat down next to him. They ate in silence, side by side, a former outcast and a former priest.
At the same stone, from the same cauldron. After that night, the tension didn't disappear, but it subsided. The priests worked, alongside everyone else. They hauled stones, they dug. Some were literate and began helping Ariel with the accounting. Some knew how to treat ailments with simple herbs and helped Lena. One turned out to be an excellent cook. The temple kitchen taught him to work with whatever they had. Daniel put him in the communal kitchen next to the women who were cooking. The first day, they didn't speak. Neither did they on the second. On the third, a woman asked him how he cut onions so they wouldn't taste bitter. The priest showed her. She nodded. She tried it. It worked. On the fourth day, they talked about recipes. Food had once again done what words could not. On the 235th day, news arrived that changed everything. A caravan, not a merchant's, a royal one. 3 wagons with flags, 20 guards. But the wagons were empty. No cargo, no gifts. The soldiers looked worn out, tired, dusty, with empty flasks. They stopped at the gate. A man stepped out of the front wagon. Not young, in simple traveling clothes. No jewelry, no crown, no symbols of authority. But his back was straight, and his eyes were the eyes of a man accustomed to looking down on the world. He looked at the walls, at the fields beyond the walls, at the people, and he said, "I am a traveler. I ask for water and shelter." Daniel stood at the gate, in an apron, with a towel slung over his shoulder. He had just finished serving dinner. He looked at the traveler, at his wagons, at the soldiers, at the empty flasks, and he understood. He'd been told 3 days ago. Sammy found out through her network. The king had left the capital, in secret, with a small entourage. He's heading east, to the wastes, to a place called the Salt Spring. He's traveling not as a king, but as a supplicant, incognito, in plain clothes, with a single trusted advisor and a guard detail ordered to remain silent. Daniel knew who was standing before him, but he didn't let it show. That was important. Not to humiliate, not to expose, to let the man enter as he wished to enter, quietly, simply, like everyone else. Daniel said, "Come in." He led him and the soldier inside, into the common hall. By this time, the common hall was a proper hall, a large canopy of stone and wood, with long stone tables, with benches, with a hearth in the center. Everyone ate there, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. Exiles next to former mercenaries, children next to the elderly, former priests next to former thieves. Daniel seated the king, between Sammy and the old man with the cane. Sammy shifted over. She looked at the stranger without interest. The old man nodded to him, politely, as he would to any new face. A bowl was placed in front of the king, rice with stewed meat and vegetables, the same as everyone else's. From the same pot, the same portion. A mug of water, a piece of bread. That was all. The king looked at the bowl,
Daniel saw his hands resting on the table, hands that had signed decrees, that had held the scepter, that had decided the fates of thousands. Now they lay next to a clay bowl in a dining hall in the middle of the desert. The king picked up a spoon. He tasted it. He ate slowly, in silence. All around, the usual lunch bustled. Children laughed. Someone argued about whose turn it was to wash the pots. Taryn was telling something to Hertz, the blacksmith. Meyer was handing out seconds. Yuna was doing calculations on a piece of paper. Lena was bandaging someone's finger. Kyra stood by the wall and ate standing up, as always. Ariel sat by the window and read. A typical day. A typical lunch. For everyone except one person, who ate and remained silent, glancing around with eyes in which something was breaking. After lunch, the king found Daniel, or perhaps Daniel found him. They stood by the wall, looking out at the fields. Green rows of rice, root vegetables, rows of carrots. Everything was growing, despite the drought, despite the heat, despite everything. The king said quietly, I thought you had built a kingdom here. Daniel wiped his hands on his apron. He shook his head. No, Your Majesty. I built a dining hall here. Just a very large one. The king turned to him, abruptly. His eyes grew sharp. You know who I am. Daniel nodded. From the very first moment. The king was silent. Then he asked, Why didn't you say anything? Daniel replied, Because everyone eats the same here. Kings too. They talked until evening. Daniel explained, Not everything, not about the terminal, not about the other world, but about the system, about supplies, about fermentation, about how food can be stored for months, about rotation, about consumption rates, about wells and filtration, about fertilizers and seeds, about how the drought isn't forever, and that the earth will recover if you help it, about how people don't need magic to eat. They need knowledge, and hands, and a system. The king listened. His face changed, not once, many times. Surprise, disbelief, understanding, anger. Daniel didn't ask who the anger was directed at. Maybe at the temple, maybe at himself. When Daniel finished, the king was silent for a long time. Then he said, I need your help. Not as a king, as a man who had just eaten from a clay bowl and, for the first time in a year, wasn't afraid of tomorrow. It started to rain outside the window, the first in 6 months. Heavy drops pounded against the stone, against the eaves, against the dusty ground. The people in the hall froze, all at once. They turned their heads toward the windows, toward the open door. Drops fell on the threshold, on the stones. They darkened in the dust. Someone went outside. Someone else followed him, and another. The children ran out first. The adults followed them. A minute later, the entire Solianoe Eastalk stood in the rain. 160 people. Wet. With their faces turned up. With their eyes closed. Rain. Water from the sky. Just water. An old man with a cane stood there and cried, openly, without shame. Mire stood next to Daniel. Her hair was soaked. She was smiling, quietly. Kyra stood on the wall, face toward the sky. Drops ran down the scar across her eyebrow. Yuna stood with papers that were getting soggy in her hands and didn't notice. Ariel stood by the gate, upright, with her eyes closed. Her lips moved. A prayer, or thanks, or just words that others didn't need to hear. Sammy stood on the roof of the canopy, arms outstretched, catching the drops in her palms. Lena stood at the entrance to the infirmary and looked up at the sky with an expression Daniel had seen on her face only once before,
when she saved that first child. Relief. Daniel stood and watched them all and thought
The terminal had nothing to do with it. It was just rain. Just a coincidence.
But sometimes coincidences mean more than plans. It rained for 3 days. Not heavy, gentle, steady. The earth drank and could not get enough. The wells rose, the fields came to life. Ariel said it was a tear. That's what the magicians call the last moisture before the earth dries up completely. After that, it will be worse. But now, Daniel used every drop. Cloth was hung between the posts. Water dripped into pots, pots into cisterns. 3 stone vessels lined with clay, each holding 1,000 liters. By the end of the rain, all 3 were full, 3,000 liters. For 160 people, that's 20 days. Just water that fell from the sky, and saved because someone had thought ahead. The king stayed for 5 days. He walked through the settlement. He looked at the pots with fermented root, at the distribution schedule, at Ariel's notes, at the paper and pencils he had never seen before.
At all this small, precise apparatus that worked without magic. On the 4th day, he summoned Daniel for a conversation. They sat in the terminal room. Daniel decided to show him the screen, the catalog, the distribution window. He ordered a cup of green tea. The terminal dispensed it. The king tasted it. His eyebrows rose. Daniel said, "It's a machine from my world. It dispenses food. It's tied to this location. It can't be taken away. It can't be copied. And it has a limit, 119 servings. That won't be enough for the whole continent." The king asked, "Then why are you showing it to me?" Daniel replied, "Because the machine isn't the solution. The solution is knowledge, fermentation, storage, rotation, fertilizers, filtration. Everything I do can be done without the machine. Slower, harder, but it can be done. Teach people to store food, and they'll survive any drought." The king was silent. He drank his tea. Then he said, "Calden believes you are a threat to the order." Daniel shook his head. "I propose a different order, one where a person's value lies not in their gift, but in what they can do and are willing to give." The king said, "Fine words. Lords listen to power." Daniel nodded. "Then show them the power of the reserves. In 3 months, half the continent will be starving. Whoever has the food makes the decisions. I have it. The temple does not." The king looked at him. Then he said, "You could have demanded a title, land, power, but you ask only to be left alone and to be allowed to teach the people." Daniel replied, "I am a storekeeper, not a king. I need a warehouse and people who know how to use it." The king left quietly. A week later, Sammy brought the news. By royal decree, Salt Spring has been declared a territory under the protection of the crown. The temple's campaign is forbidden. Calden received the decree and read it twice. Then he sat down and didn't move for a long time. Daniel didn't celebrate. It's a truce, not a victory. But time has been bought. The drought struck again. After the rain, things got worse. The rain had stopped. The temperature rose. It was hot even at night. People came in droves. 213 people on the 250th day. The terminal, plus the harvest, plus fermentation, yielded 300 portions. Just enough. Meyer kept track of every portion, every person, every pregnant woman who needed more calories, every builder who needed protein. The terminal remembers numbers. She remembered people. On the 260th day, a figure appeared on the horizon. One, in white, with a staff, unescorted, High Priest Calden. He came alone, on foot across the wastelands. He stopped before the gates, and Daniel saw in his eyes neither anger nor hatred. Hunger. Simple human hunger. His clothes hung loosely. He had lost weight. His hands trembled. His lips were gray. He had walked without water, without food. Why? Daniel knew.
Calden had come to see for himself, to stand before the door he had ordered destroyed. Because he was no coward, he was a man of faith. And faith had led him into the heart of what he considered heresy. Daniel didn't give a speech. He didn't celebrate. He went to the kitchen. He returned with a bowl, rice, meat, vegetables, the same portion as everyone else's. He set it in front of Calden. He sat down across from him. Calden stared at the bowl for a long time. He sank to his knees. He took it. He ate slowly, each spoonful like a prayer. When the bowl was empty, he set it down. He looked up. His voice was hoarse. "My priests are starving." Calden stayed for 3 days. He watched the settlement, the former priests hauling stones alongside the former thieves, the children among the garden beds, at Meyer with her precision, at Kairu on the wall. Ariel spoke with him once, for a long time, quietly. When she returned, she said only, "He won't change, but he'll stop interfering." On the 3rd day, Calden approached Daniel. He said, "I am revoking the decree on heresy. I need a pretext." Daniel thought. "Declare that the salt spring is a trial of the earth, that the people have endured it, that their path is not heresy, but another way that the earth permits." Calden nodded. The wording allowed him to back down without losing face. A compromise, not perfect, but workable, like everything Daniel did. Calden left with a bag full of food and a flask of water. Daniel watched him go and thought that defeating an enemy was easy, but feeding him and letting him go was the hardest thing in the world. Months passed. The drought continued, but the salt spring held out. 300 people by the end of the first year, 3-meter walls, 4 towers, wells, fields yielding 3 harvests a year, 100 fermentation pots in a cellar hewn into the rock, a smithy, a loom, a potter's wheel, a school where Ariel taught the children, an infirmary where Lena trained the assistants, Mir in the warehouse, Yuna in trade, Kyra in defense, Taryn in construction, Sammy in intelligence. Everyone in their place. The system worked. In the evening, Daniel stood by the terminal. A ritual. Our 68% availability. 119 portions. But now, that was less than 1/3 of the total volume. The rest came from the fields. Fermentation. 23 sheep. Goats. Chickens. The system was becoming stable. The terminal as a starting impulse, not a crutch. It gave the push. After that, people managed on their own. A message flashed on the screen. New. External synchronization request. Terminal 3, south. Active. Requesting communication protocol. His heart raced. Someone had found another terminal. Daniel typed a reply. Terminal 7, east. Active. Operator, Daniel Cho. Response in a minute. Text in Japanese. The system translated it. You're from Earth too. His hands were shaking. He wasn't alone. He typed, yes. Who are you? Pause. Response. Later. You're having a drought too. Yes. Response. So the plan is working. What plan? The terminals were sent on purpose, from Earth's future. After the catastrophe that destroyed the food chain, someone decided to sow the seeds of civilization in another world. You are one of the seeds. I am another. There are 7 of us. Daniel sat and read. He reread it. Terminals from the future. Catastrophe. 7 operators. Scattered across the continent, each in the right place. Not by chance. Calculation. He remembered the accident, the steering wheel, darkness, impact, staged. His death was staged, a tag on his chest, weak, do not feed, the final test. Would he remain human when the world called him trash? He remained.
That is why the terminal opened the door. The operator in the south wrote more. 7 terminals, 7 nodes, connected. Each one trains the people around it. When the connection is established, the terminals exchange data, recipes, knowledge. You're not just a node, you're part of the network.
Daniel read and smiled. A logistics network, a distributed system. He'd worked with these his whole life, and now he was part of one. Not a product on a shelf, a node. He went outside. Night, stars, foreign constellations that had become his own over the course of a year. He walked through the quiet streets, past awnings and workshops, past the kitchen where a bowl for the hungry stood. Sammy's bowl, he checked. Full. A flatbread and a handful of berries. Someone else had put the berries there, not him. The system worked not because he controlled it, because people had accepted it. He climbed onto the wall. Kyra stood beside him. Night shift. She nodded, silently. They looked out at the desert. Somewhere to the south, someone stood at another terminal and was feeding people too. Kyra said quietly, "Meyer asked me to tell you. Your bowl is on the rock." Daniel went down, the bowl on the warm rock, covered with a plate.
Just like every evening, without a single miss. Rice with meat and vegetables. Mira was sitting nearby, waiting. He sat down, ate. She was silent. She looked at the stars. He finished eating. He said, "Mire, I found out why I'm here. I was sent, on purpose, to do what I'm doing." She was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "But you would have done the same thing, even without a reason. Just because you are you." He looked at her. She looked straight at him, as an equal. And he realized she was right. He would have done the same thing, with or without the terminal. Because he saw someone hungry and couldn't walk past. An invisible logistics specialist who made sure there was food on the shelves. The sign said, "Weak, do not feed." But he fed them, the whole world. Morning. The sun was rising. Daniel stood at the gate, in an apron, with a towel slung over his shoulder. Behind him, the salt spring was waking up. Smoke, the smell of porridge, voices, children's laughter, the clang of a hammer, the splash of water. He turned. He walked toward the kitchen. Mire was already setting out the bowls, 300 of them, in neat rows. He stood beside her, took a ladle, and began serving breakfast, portion by portion, face by face. The old man with the cane, Taryn, Kyra, Yuna, Lena, Sammy, Ariel, former mercenaries, former priests, former outcasts, now just people, eating at the same table, every day. He served and counted, like in a warehouse, one portion, next. The work of a logistics specialist, the most important job in the world. Mire handed out bowls beside him. Their hands sometimes touched. The sun rose higher. The day began. Another day when no one would go to bed hungry. And somewhere far away, someone stood at another terminal and was also handing out breakfast, and also believed that the morning begins with a bowl of hot porridge placed before the one who needs it, quietly, without words, because that's the